Please, everyone, take your seats. Please take your seats. Doesn't matter.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Day 2 of the JNS International Policy Summit. If there's been one voice in the Jewish world who is unafraid to tackle any and every important issue regarding the defense of Israel, regarding anti-Semitism, regarding the failures of the American Jewish communal establishment, or issues of domestic American politics, it is Jonathan Tobin. But Jonathan doesn't only point out what is wrong. He's always there to offer the proper course of action for each and every major issue. And he does it day after day after day after day. I could tell you, as somebody who knows how to write, I don't know how Jonathan is able to do what he does. It's unbelievable. And I am pleased to present my partner, my colleague, my friend, the one and only editor-in-chief of the Jewish News Syndicate, Jonathan Tobin.
Good morning. Boker Tov. Thank you, Alex. My gosh. You know, the way he was leading into that, I did not think my name was going to come at the end of that paragraph. I was genuinely caught by surprise. No, thank you. Well, thank you and welcome. I'll say it again. Welcome to Day 2 of the inaugural JNS International Policy Summit. It's been thrilling for us to host so many important figures who share our concerns about the future of Israel and the United States. We've heard already from so many important voices during our first day, not least from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And today we'll hear from even more great speakers, such as new U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Mike Hagee, our former colleague and dear friend, Caroline Glick, now a key advisor to the Prime Minister, Pastor John Hagee, and a cast of thousands, as they used to say in Hollywood. All of us who have gathered here for this summit, including the Prime Minister, members of his cabinet, the new ambassador, and so many other leaders, thinkers, and writers, as well as all of you who have come to Jerusalem to hear them, are faced with an important set of questions. We're met at a time of unprecedented challenges for the Jewish people, for Israel, and the United States. More than 18 months ago, a Hamas-led Palestinian Arab terrorist assault on southern Israel was more than a barbaric set of atrocities. It was the initiation of a new war on Israel's existence unlike any other in its history. Not only did it inflict a traumatic loss of life, terrible crimes committed against the innocent, and the kidnapping of more than 250 Israelis, it also unleashed a wave of anti-Semitic hate throughout the globe, most particularly on American college campuses, where Jewish students became the targets of violent pro-Hamas mobs who sought to silence, shun, intimidate, and threaten them. Thus, this latest round of the conflict is not just another border skirmish, or a terrorist atrocity to be dealt with but then quickly forgotten until the next set of attacks comes at a time of the enemy's choosing. While the wars of survival that Israel fought in its early decades were existential in nature, as Arab armies sought vainly to push the Jews into the sea, the challenge we now face is in some ways far more insidious and dangerous. In the late 1940s, 50s, 60s, and even into the 1970s, Israel was embattled. But Jews abroad, especially in the West and even in the United States, were not subjected to the kind of hounding and delegitimization that they are now facing. Today, fueled by the fashionable, toxic left-wing ideologies of critical race theory, intersectionality, and settler colonialism, and the woke catechism of diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, are having a devastating impact on a generation of young people. So much of this generation of young have been indoctrinated in the neo-Marxist idea that the world is divided into two forever warring groups: people of color who are always victims and always in the right, no matter what they do, and white oppressors who are always in the wrong, no matter what they do or don't do. These people look at the world, and no matter what they see only a race war, in which, however illogical their reasoning, however divorced this intellectual construct is from the truth about the Middle East, Jews, and Israel, they believe are inevitably part of the white oppressor class that must be defeated and destroyed. This is why this targeting of Jews has been tolerated and encouraged by the administrations of elite educational institutions. But it is also why these attacks on Jews are depicted in the mainstream corporate press and even many outlets that purport to represent and serve the Jewish community as merely the well-meaning activism of idealistic progressive youngsters who should be heard and validated, rather than labeled for what they are, a mob of deluded supporters of a genocidal movement that is not so much analogous to the Nazis, but their successors, who believe that one Jewish state on the planet is one too many. So while Israelis continue to fight for their lives against Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, as well as their paymasters in Iran, Jews elsewhere are also now under siege. This set of dilemmas has also set up a new set of challenges for journalists, and one that, unfortunately, most of them are failing to meet. For not only has the woke left undermined education, it has also wreaked havoc on the media, as in the last decade, a generation of journalists has entered the profession believing their duty is activism on behalf of leftist causes, rather than the traditional search for truth. Whereas media coverage of Israel and the Middle East had often been biased in the past, and much of that slant was due to ignorance of the history and the context of the conflict, or manipulation by Palestinian fixers, or just plain sloppiness and laziness. But in the age of woke journalism, those already serious problems are now compounded by a false belief on the part of many in the newsrooms or most major outlets that Israel is a white oppressor state and that the Palestinians are powerless victims who have no agency in deciding their conduct or their fate. That is the formula for not just a biased media, but also a media that is completely uninterested in learning about the reality of Israel or Israeli and Palestinian society. Like faux journalist Ta-Nehisi Coates, a much lauded writer who turned a 10-day trip to the region into a book published a year after October 7th, but which never mentioned October 7th, Hamas, or terrorism, today's best and brightest in journalism aren't interested in reporting and fairly evaluating both sides of the conflict. They think their job is merely to regurgitate anything that might confirm a predetermined conclusion that Israel is a replica of the Jim Crow South. Far from an outlier, Coates is emblematic of the way so many people at major print and broadcast media think. In such a media environment, accurate accounts of the facts, context, and sober reporting are not only rare, they are essentially deemed undesirable by most of those who inform Americans about the news, and this is also felt in the media around the world, and yes, here in Israel too. Moreover, the prejudicial, race-obsessed account of Israel, utterly divorced from the reality of a war that has nothing to do with race, but everything to do with genocidal Islamist beliefs, is almost never conveyed to American media consumers. It also filters down into social media, where so many people get, nearly all young persons get their information about the world. Why then be surprised The polls show that even as young people, young Americans anyway, are trending more conservative in their politics than their elders, nearly half of them side with Hamas, a genocidal organization of murderers, rapists, and kidnappers with medieval attitudes about the world rather than with a liberal democratic Israel. Sadly, much of that prejudice also makes it felt among American Jews, many of whom know little or nothing about Israel or the reality of a conflict that the Palestinians have no interest in ending on any terms other than Israel's destruction. Nor are all too many of them aware that the plain fact is that it is the Jews who are the indigenous people of the land of Israel, and no one else. In a media and cultural milieu in which false narratives about race invariably prevail over facts, and lies about Israel obscure or deny the justice of the Zionist cause, what chance is there for journalists who want to practice their craft honestly? Well, if that's your goal, you're not likely to get a job at the New York Times or most major outlets. Indeed, to sum up the situation of the American media, there's good news, there's bad news rather, good news, and some even better news. The bad news is that not only is anti-Israel media bias worse than ever, but in the case of mainstream corporate media, it's not fixable, since contemporary journalists aren't just making mistakes out of ignorance that can be corrected, but are deliberately skewing the news against Israel in order to make it conform with their false, woke, activist beliefs about the world. The good news is, as the 2024 U.S. elections proved, the mainstream media no longer matters as much as it once did. We can't make it better, and it's a waste of time trying to fix it. But these leftist dominant outlets are also increasingly the dinosaurs of journalism. While some of them, like the New York Times, have a profitable business plan geared to cater to the political left and the credentialed elites that are the backbone of the left, their influence is declining and increasingly limited to those already inside the liberal bubble. The even better news is that there are now a growing number of alternative news sources that, far from being outliers, are now the only ones that you can actually trust to give you fair, honest, and truthful accounts of the world. I'm proud to say that JNS is one of them. And our incredible growth in the reach of our articles, our unmatched array of news and opinion, as well as our growing lineup of popular podcasts, is testimony to the hunger for honest journalism that exists today. At the core of our mission at JNS is a relentless dedication to giving our readers, listeners, and viewers the truth about Israel, the Jewish world, and the United States. Our success is linked to our belief that integrity and reliability, rather than the mere pursuit of clickbait, is the path to success. Our privilege in a world where so many claim that one must always acknowledge your advantages is that it is our job to tell the truth, rather than to distort it, to conform to ideologies that enable hatred and anti-Semitism. Sadly, this is a time when so many journalists and Jews are still prepared to bow down to the false gods of woke DEI culture, to the point where they're even opposing governmental efforts to defend Jewish students against anti-Semitism. They actually oppose efforts to end the reign of leftist indoctrination that seeks the destruction of Western civilization and the values of the American Republic, as well as the oppression of Jews. But that also means that there is a crying need for a home, for a journalistic outlet that has the courage to speak the truth. And courage is our most important value. That is the underserved niche of the media world that we at JNS are here to fill. We will not falter in this effort. And I know you, our supporters, readers, listeners, and viewers, will stand with us and continue to give us the resources to continue this fight. With God's help, I know we will not only continue to grow, but that we will ultimately prevail. Thank you.
No one man has done more to advocate for American Jewry over the last 4 decades than Malcolm Hoenlein. The longtime unofficial president of the American Jewish community, Malcolm is a powerful community organizer, politician, diplomat, and most importantly, a unifier. The missions that he has led as the executive vice chairman of the Conference of Presidents of major American Jewish organizations long paved the way towards the signing of the Abraham Accords. Now the president of the Great Synagogue of Jerusalem and a fierce advocate against anti-Semitism and protecting American Jewish communities, I present to you Malcolm Hoenlein for a critical assessment of key challenges facing global Jewry.
Organizers for putting me in this enviable position of being between Jonathan Tobin and Pastor Hagee. So thank you very much. I was glad to find out that JNS doesn't stand for Jews Never Surrender, but that is its mission. And I think JNS, and a tribute to all of you who are involved, all of you who had the vision to start it and who support it, really deserve our applause, our credit, because it's filled a vital void and continues to be a great service to the Jewish community. You know, when we face problems, we look back to our tradition, because Judaism uniquely views history as not being about the past, but about the present and future. When we sat at the Seder, or when we read the Megillah on Purim, if you only read it as an historic document, you haven't fulfilled the mitzvah. Only if you understand its contemporary significance, if we understand the relevance and the guidance that we can derive from our traditions for the challenges we meet today. And in this period, just in this week's, there's one theme that repeats itself all the time, and that's zechirah, remembrance. From when we remember what Amalek did to us on Shabbat Zachar, to remember how they attacked us when we were weak and tired, to Yom HaZikaron, that we will mark tomorrow, the day memorializing those who fell in the defense of the state and made it possible for us all to be here. Yom HaShoah, where the word chosen to symbolize the Holocaust was not revenge or avenge, it was Zachor, remember. We say the prayer of Yizkor on Pesach and Shavuot, because that keeps the memory of those who passed with us, the lessons they taught us, the messages we have to derive. So Jews look back in order to look forward. Winston Churchill once said, the further back you look, the further ahead you will see. Our sages said it 1,000 years earlier. And they taught us how to understand both the successes and the failures of the past and understand our obligations to the future. I think that there were a few times, certainly in the last 80 years, when it was more important for us to be able to look back, to learn the lessons, to understand our obligations, both to the past and to the future. The other lesson that we learn in this period is the importance of achdut, unity. There was only one condition God placed on every great miracle that happened to the Jewish people, from the Exodus from Egypt to the receiving of the Torah at Mount Sinai that we will celebrate in a few weeks on Shavuot, when we stood Ki'ish Echad B'Lev Echad as one people with one heart. And this is a time when we have to put aside differences and recognize that we are Am Echad B'Lev Echad. We are one people with one heart. Stop criticizing other Jews. Stand together, work together. Where there are differences, deal with them in private and show that we can be a strong force, because unity is the only way we can overcome our enemies. I can't see the lighting here. So unlike Jonathan Tobin, I don't get to type out my speeches. Many here and around the world need to look anew at the challenges that we face, especially after the traumatic period that we went through and continue to go through, not only here in Israel, but with the onslaught against the Jewish people around the world. Anti-Semitism numbers continue to mount all over the world, record numbers in many of them. The majority of incidents still go unreported. So even the numbers we know, as astounding as they are truly small in comparison to reality. The intensity and frequency of hostile manifestations, from assaults on individuals and institutions to mass events, from consolidating control in school boards and city councils to taking over cities, as we saw in Texas, in Dearborn, Paterson, New Jersey. These are all long-term campaigns. They began years ago. We warned repeatedly about it, but nobody wanted to listen. They placed people in key positions. They started in city councils, electing delegates to conventions many years ago, but nobody wanted to pay attention to it. They gained influence and took control of vital institutions. This is not a conspiracy-driven theory. This is the reality we face today. And how many of us have really been, and of our European counterparts, can now, in hindsight, say the same. The details might differ from country to country, but the messages, the themes, the means, the objectives are the same. We have to learn to cooperate more and to create a national entity, an international entity. I'm calling today for the creation of a global early warning system. We know that the memes, the themes move country to country, and so do the personnel. We now need to bring together all of those countries that have full-time security operations to work together, to be able to anticipate. Because if we know in advance, you can begin to prepare. Many years ago, I warned about the BDS coming to America to a lot of ridicule. But I did it not because I had any wisdom, but because I saw what was happening in England and knew that it would come to America very soon in the same way of top-down discrimination and implementation. And such was the case. So that if we have the will to create this kind of an entity, and we now have people in some of the global organizations who are prepared to take this step, I think it'll be a vital first step in that process. We have seen how broad the infiltration is, not just in the most visible areas. We know the campus problem, and even in that, you know very little. Today, a report will come out that will show $29 billion came to American universities from Qatar, China, Saudi Arabia, and others in the 4 years of the Biden administration, double all the previous 40 years. And that's only the money that's reported. We know that billions more have been invested, but not just there, but in K-12, when there are public schools in New York that have wall-sized maps of the Middle East without Israel. And the superintendent said to me, well, why would we? There's no Arabic culture in Israel. It is across the country, where children are taken out of kindergarten classes to demonstrate outside a synagogue against Israel. When we see in high schools deliberate distortions of history and fact, even about the Holocaust, when 40% of American young people can't identify Auschwitz, we have a problem. And that requires, therefore, that all of us, each of us, takes a stand. And it's not just an individual professor. It's not an individual teacher. It's the institutions that we have to challenge. The universities have to be held to account. The school systems, the mayors, all have to be held to account and not be bought off by the soft public relations releases that so often seem to satisfy our community. We see it in the C-suite. How many corporate 500 leaders have come to me since October 7th and say, it's in my boardroom. They make anti-Semitic comments with me sitting there. What do I do about it? We know that it permeates politics and political campaigns. We know it's present in legislatures. We see the increasing influence that it's having. Jews are the prime target, but we're never the last. It's time for us to express this, not just as being defensive about Jewish interests, but that this is about Western values. It's about American values. When they attack statues of Lincoln and Washington, we should point it out to the American people. This is an assault on everything they believe in, that we share. And we can build alliances with many people that we have too long ignored. We can make common cause with others who are under assault. I was approached recently by former leaders of BASIC, Black Americans in Support of Israel, saying, we're ready to stand up for Israel, call on us. Hindu leaders, we have studied it and shown that there's an exact parallel between the rise of anti-Semitism on campuses and anti-Hindu bias. There are so many others with the Hispanic communities, many of whom are evangelicals, many of whom are ready to stand up for us. But we have to reach out to them, enlist them, and get their support for the efforts that we engage in. We know that many other people are suffering. So we have to speak up for the Christians in Africa, Nigeria, and other parts of the world, in the Sudan, in Libya, who are being persecuted. Unfortunately, the Druze, the Kurds, these are our allies. These are our friends. But most of all, they're being persecuted. And the world is silent, because if there's no Jews, there's no news. We have to make it news. And we have to show that we are standing on principle, that we are bringing together people to stand together to protect the values that protect us, because while Israel's the first victim and Jews are the canary in the mine, we're never the last. And frankly, I'm sick and tired of all of those who can shed crocodile tears at memorials for dead Jews, but can't stand up for living Jews and a living Jewish state. We need more sophisticated approaches, utilizing the latest technologies. We have to learn how to disseminate information more effectively. We have to make sure it's verified and accurate, anticipating, not just reacting, cooperating, not competing. We have to create a movement, as we did for Soviet Jewry, a worldwide movement against Jew hatred, not anti-Semitism because it's meaningless, against Jew hatred, and demand that the leaders of the world stand up and clearly declare themselves that they will not tolerate Jew hatred in any form, that they'll identify with IRA, that they will support our efforts, and if they won't, we have to be prepared to stand against them. It is disgraceful, frankly, to me, that on October 8th, we did not have a worldwide demonstration, that we didn't have a worldwide strike of Jews and Jewish business people to send a message of our solidarity and our determination. It was a mistake, but it's not too late. Now we have to enlist together with the great allies that we have to stand with them. We think we know. Believe me, you don't know the tip of the iceberg, not just about the financial things. How the bots that are created officially by China, Turkey, Iran, Russia, and are being utilized against us. One day we analyzed the calls to the White House. 80% of the anti-Israel messages came from bots, not from people. We have to expose them. We have to declare who they are. We have to show the state sponsors that are behind it and hold them all to account. And frankly, the steps the administration is taking, if you disagree with some of it, deal with it quietly. Otherwise, stand with it and say we will support these efforts to hold universities to account and the anti-Semites to account. So I ask that we convene a world conference, that organizations put aside their differences, and that the leaders, the philanthropic leaders today gather and say, we will hold to account the organizations, the individuals, the institutions, to find out who really is delivering and to help support them. And those that not, to help build them up or frankly merge them into other operations. We are spending well into the 9 figures in America to fight Jew hatred. We're winning battles, we're losing the war. That has to stop. And we have to see to it that all of the amazing technologies that are coming out of Jewish brains and Jewish organizations who are all too ready to help, but find little receptivity, and I know from European colleagues the same is true, that we have to say now that every dollar is sacred. We can't match the billions, but we don't need to. We have a higher ally with us, and we have great friends, and when Jews stand together, there's no enemy we can't overcome, because we have people like Pastor Hagee and Kufite, 10 million members, standing with us, but only if we're standing up, speaking up, shouting, and telling them, we appreciate every single thing you do for us every day. We need to be straightforward with ourselves and with others. We need to look at the world in a constructive way, and I know my time has run out, but I will put the rest in writing at some future time, maybe. At the end of each book of the Bible that we read, we say, Chazak, Chazak, v'nis chazek, be strong, and we will be strengthened. What it means is that each of us individually has to use our talents, our resources, to be strong, to stand up, not to cower in the face of the challenges, because those who assault us are basically cowards. That's why terrorists don't fight armies. That's why the haters hide behind masks. We have to expose them, but not cower before them, because they exploit our weakness or perceived weakness. Chazak, each of you has to be strong. Think of the message, think of the mission that you can undertake. And when you go back to your countries, to mobilize. Chazak, be strong in your communities. V'nis chazek, and we will strengthen one another. That we will emerge as the force that we must be. Never again cannot be a hollow slogan at rallies. Never again has to be a pledge that each of us takes anew, every generation, that we will never be silent. We will never allow the situation that happened 80 years ago to reoccur again. That we will stand against the hatred in every way. That we will say thank you to our friends. That we will be unified. Unity does not require homogeneity. Unity requires us recognizing that what we have in common far outweighs our differences, that the whole is far greater than the sum of the parts. We are a power. We are strong. And the Bible tells us how the Jews said when facing the giants, we are grasshoppers in their eyes. The giants didn't say it. The Jews said it. We are the giants. We have behind us the right and the force and thousands of years of history. King David didn't come to Jerusalem 3,000 years ago and make it a capital to have a hotel named for him. He did it to be the center of the universe and for us to inherit it and to protect it for all future generations. That's our challenge. God has given us a new opportunity to have a Jewish state, an ingathering place for the exiles. All of you who worked with us on Soviet Jewry, Ethiopian Jewry, Iranian Jews, Iraqi Jews, Yemeni Jews, who would have been lost to Jewish history otherwise. We can overcome all of the enemies and all of the challenges if we're united, if we put aside our differences, and we stand together. Then future generations, just as we look back and judge that generation of 80 years ago, as we did on the amazing March of the Living, and having there the university presidents and security officials was an amazing addition. But just as we look back and judge them and ask, what did you do? They try to hide behind a cloak of ignorance. It's not true. They knew. Before Operation Hoenlein, they broke the Nazi codes when 2,200,000 Jews were killed in 6 months in Lublin, Sobibor, and 6 other places. They didn't give it out because they didn't want the Nazis to know they broke the codes. We have no cloak of ignorance. We know everything. You know everything. Your grandchildren are going to ask, what did you do? If we rise up to this occasion, we follow the lead of JNS, we stand informed and active and strong, they will praise you and thank you for making it a better world for them.
When I introduced Malcolm, and he was walking up, he said, "You didn't say in the introduction that Malcolm's also my good friend," but I just thought it was obvious to everybody. Thank you so much. America's continued support for the State of Israel is due only in part to America's large Jewish community, but considerably larger is America's faith-based evangelical community that has proven itself over the last decades to be a bedrock of support for Israel. And no organization has done more to be a prominent advocate for enhancing Christian support than Christians United for Israel. I am pleased to present to you now the daughter of founder Pastor John Hagee and chairwoman of the Kufai Action Fund and a powerhouse for Israel in her own right, Sarah Hagee Parker.
Thank you. This morning I've been asked to make an introduction, so I will endeavor in just a few moments to introduce both a man and his mission. I introduce a man who has dedicated the majority of his life preaching the singular message of Israel, you are not alone. I introduce a man who has spent every day of my life taking that message and turning it into a mission that would resonate, replicate, and birth a movement of millions of like-minded Christian Zionists that are united for one purpose. I introduce a man who, in reading the sacred scriptures concerning our righteous mandate to bless the Jewish people and the nation of Israel, takes God at his word. A man who believes that love is not what you say, love is what you do, and that one must do more than pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Whether one finds themselves in a palace like Queen Esther or in the pit like Joseph, you must always act on behalf of Israel and her people. And in his case, that would include preaching against anti-Semitic replacement theology in American churches for the past 40 years, raising nearly $200 million for Israeli humanitarian efforts, mobilizing students across high schools, colleges, and universities in hundreds of campuses across America, trained to combat the scourge of anti-Semitism that hides behind the mask of social justice and anti-Zionism, or more recently, flying hundreds of our members into Washington, D.C. from every single state in the nation with less than 1 week's notice to make a final push for the billions of dollars in emergency military assistance to Israel, which had shamefully been stuck in our congressional quagmire for 6 months in Israel's darkest hours. I introduce to each of you a man who has taught generations of Christians that what we do to bless Israel and its people is not to ensure Israel's survival, but to ensure our own. I introduce a man whose impact and efforts, with God's help, have been exponential. For what started with just one prayer and one rabbi has now multiplied into the nation's largest pro-Israel grassroots organization with millions of members across America and beyond, and not because those members agree about everything, but because those members are united in these things: that Israel is not a political issue, it is a biblical issue; that the scourge of anti-Semitism isn't a Jewish issue, it's a human issue; and that no matter how you pray or how you vote, that standing with the Jewish state and her people is not conditioned on anything save and except the immutable word of an unchanging God. And finally, I am here to introduce a man who has bred in me and millions like me a phrase that was once so controversial, a man who believes that there is no success without a successor, and has taught us all the following axiom, that if there is a line to be drawn, then you draw it around us both, Christians and Jews, for we are one. We are Christians united for Israel. Ladies and gentlemen, will you please make welcome Pastor John Hagee.
Following Malcolm Hoenlein is a little bit like a woodpecker following a chainsaw. Good morning, friends, and thank you for inviting me here as we gather in Jerusalem, the eternal and undivided capital of the state of Israel. I am honored to be among so many distinguished individuals and aggressive defenders of Israel. I bring you greetings from the 11 million plus members of Christians United for Israel in the United States of America. And as my daughter has said, our motto is, if a line has to be drawn, then draw that line around both Christians and Jews. The Jewish people are God's chosen people. The Bible says they are the apple of his eye, who have an eternal covenant to own the land of Israel forever. 3 days ago, I visited Krakow and stood in the dreadful shadows of the ovens of Auschwitz. I wept and I prayed, not only for the past, but also for our failures in the here and now. I prayed for the fate of the 59 Israelis who are still held hostage by Hamas, for the warriors and the wounded, for the survivors and for the bereaved. But at Christians United for Israel, we do not just pray. We do not just speak, we take action. The Bible commands Christians, comfort ye, my people. That's the Jewish people, saith the Lord. Christians United for Israel and John Hagee Ministries has given more than $180 million to comfort, to aid, and to defend the Jewish people. We act in defense of Israel's sovereignty right to make decisions of war and peace free of international interference. We act in opposition to the scourge of the one-world Jew hatred that has once again come out of the darkness and is spreading across the United States of America. We do these things because we are Christians who worship the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. For we know that all the nations of the world can only be blessed through the chosen people. As the psalmist made clear, do not touch my anointed ones. Do my prophets no harm. Won't you read that again? Do not touch my anointed ones. That would be the Jewish people. And do my prophets no harm. These words are directed to the nations of the world. And I'm Israel, or the ancient ones, the apple of God's eye, the apple of God's eye. Yet the nations of the world have miserably failed to behave righteously, from the tin-horn dictators who hold sway over the political brothel that is the United Nations. To the holier-than-thou Europeans who spend centuries slaughtering each other and murdering the Jews in the Crusades in direct defiance of God's clear and unchanging law. As an American, I must admit my shame that certain feeble policies of the United States government toward the mullahs and their obsessive support for terrorism, at least in part, enabled the October 7th massacre. America's self-serving flattery towards the tyrants of Tehran and Washington's worship of any agreement with Iran during previous administrations led to the international community aiding and abetting the world's leading sponsor of terror until that awful nuclear agreement was torn up by our courageous 45th President of the United States, Donald Trump. But at that point, trying to find a way to make these lights work. But at that point, most of the damage had been done, and many promises of a stronger agreement with Tehran only served to enable the Islamic Republic to ensure its bloodthirsty terrorist proxies like Hamas to attack Israel with stronger weapons. And in the wake of the October 7th, no rational world leader can allow the terrorism that already resulted in the massacre of thousands to be legitimized in exchange for any deals with Iran. Tragically, America's international leadership has been undermined by massive swings in the political pendulum. At the end of the day, those who worship, those who enable murderers, rapists, and terrorists have a share in the responsibility for all that transpires when such evil is encouraged by American policies. I will not repeat the horrors that took place on that infamous day because we know them all too well. We have seen the faces of the survivors and the victims. We have wept with the bereaved and have shared Israel's disgust for Gaza's wretched war criminals and terrorists. We must remember, in war, there is no substitute for victory. Victory today, victory tomorrow, and victory forever. As Winston Churchill said, without victory, there is no survival. The world changed on October the 7th, and we will never be returning to the status quo, not ever. America's capitulation to Iran, a decade ago broke our promise to never again abandon the Jewish people. As a result, Tehran has played multiple American administrations like a fiddle. They've simply had their way with our government. The refusal to return to the status quo means that America must never accept a nuclear Iran, not ever. Either the Islamic Republic destroys their nuclear facilities by themselves, or the free world will do the job for them. Gone are the days when planes filled with piles of cash are going to solve our problems with Iran. I assure you the rulers in Tehran want none of the packages currently awaiting deployment on the half-dozen B-2 stealth bombers recently stationed at Diego Garcia Island in the Indian Ocean. Iran's nuclear program must end. Anything less is unacceptable. President Trump has made that clear. Israel has made that clear. There will be no equivocation about this issue. Iran must never be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. I plan to say that Iran's terrorist proxy program must also end, and it must. But that program is being dismantled by the mighty hand of the U.S. military and the IDF through the outstretched sword of Gideon's warriors as we speak. Hezbollah will never abandon its hatred for the Jewish state, but it has been forced to abandon the bases in southern Lebanon that enable it to strike fear into the hearts of every man, woman, and child in northern Israel. What next door in Syria, Bashar al-Assad, the coward of Damascus, has fled, and responsible powers are actively working to ensure that Damascus does not become a radical Sunni Islamic state or an outpost of the Turkish strongman bringing his neo-Ottoman fantasy to life. To be clear, Turkey is not our friend or ally under the current regime. Turkey has become increasingly dictatorial and an aspiring Islamic imperialist state that is allied with the Hamas terrorists who raped and murdered their way through southern Israel more than 550 days ago. Western policy towards Turkey must be rigid. Anarchy over. Ankara must learn that you cannot enjoy Western support or approval while stabbing the United States of America and our allies in the back. Today, Hamas is a shell of its former self, but it still terrorizes the Jewish people every day. As we stand in the holy city, in the land God promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, we are all heartbroken, unable to return to any semblance of normal. 59 hostages remain in Hamas captivity. Every one of them must come home. Every day that they are held in Gaza injures not only the hostages, but every Israeli and every Palestinian caught in the crossfires. Only the Hamas death cult reveals in the pain of these innocents. So, as we look into the future, let us be clear in the wake of the atrocities committed on that historic day. The world can no sooner allow Palestinian terrorists to retake control of Gaza than we would allow the Nazis to retake Germany under control after the Holocaust. It must not happen. The October 7th terrorist murdered more than 1,200 innocent people. But let me be crystal clear. The October 7th terrorist also murdered any serious discussion of a Palestinian state, not now and not ever. God Almighty created the state of Israel, and he gave it to the Jewish people forever and forever. End of story. The Bible has a one-state solution. Israel today, Israel tomorrow, and Israel forever. The fact is, on October the 7th, Hamas killed the two-state solution. It is inconceivable that successive generations of Palestinians who have been spoon-fed an ever-increasing diet of Jew hatred would be allowed to again threaten atrocities against their innocent neighbors. On October the 8th, and until Israel had militarily eviscerated much of Hamas, ordinary Palestinians supported Hamas terrorism. Imagine for a moment if, God forbid, such atrocities had been committed in your name. As a Christian, I know the great horrors committed against the Jewish people by false Christians in the Crusades. And I am appalled by that fact. I have spent the majority of my life speaking against these false Christians. They're called in history crusaders. So whenever anti-Semitism attempts to drape itself in the American flag or the banner of Christianity, as it is taking place right now among some in my country, we at CUFI stand up, we speak out, and not just a handful of people, but millions of people are speaking out for Israel and in support of Israel. So I ask, where are the conscientious Gaysians of October 8th? Where was Abbas, the Holocaust-denying pro-terrorist leader of the Palestinian Authority? Where are the righteous among the Palestinians? Your answer is, they are nowhere to be found, and as such, the free world's approach to the Middle East can only be peace through strength. In the context of Middle Eastern policy, the Trump administration has taken numerous steps that align with this simple, long-known geopolitical axiom. This includes ending the semi-arms embargo against Jerusalem. Translation, give Israel all the weapons they need to win this war and win it now. Secondly, by being tough with our adversaries rather than berating our friends, and making clear that the United States of America does not bluff, not ever. President Trump has done these things and will not waver from that course. As the enemies of Israel and America integrate, America must never isolate. I want to say that again. As the enemies of Israel and America integrate, America must never isolate. Today, the United States has restored the idea of a credible military threat against the regime of Tehran. Long before President Trump took office in his second term, Israel had already made clear to Iran that their precious nuclear and oil facilities were not as safe as the mullahs thought. And if compelled by Iran's refusal to abandon its nuclear ambition, the free world will end Iran's nuclear ambitions with a bang. It sounds like this. Boom! Regime change is only moral, realistic, and permanent solution to Islamic Republic's obsession with destroying the free world and wiping the Jewish people from the face of the earth. A robust approach to the Middle East enabled the Abraham Accords. A weak approach to the region enabled October 7th. I have no illusions about the road ahead. The world is a more volatile place than it has been in decades. Very, very delicate time that we live in. And at all times, but especially during these times, we must look to what has enabled freedom to thrive in the past. Peace through strength. Strength through wisdom, and wisdom from the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This is the path that protects what God loves and what we love. And for generations to come, Israel, you are not alone. May God bless Jerusalem, and may God bless Israel and the Jewish people, and may God bless you.
I'd say we're off to a powerful start. One of the most important thinkers in Israel today, Gadi Taub, has come through his current views through a political awakening. Once himself an advocate of the failed conception of Israel's bureaucracy, Gadi has since become one of the most powerful voices in exposing the failed thinking. His essays have been featured proudly on JNS. I now call to the stage Gadi Taub.
I want first to thank Pastor Hagee for the amazing, arousing speech. I want to do three things in brief comments before the panel. And one is to say what we now know, what happened on the night leading to October 7. Then to say a word about why this is tied to the conception that led to the failure, and it led directly to the failure. And the third thing, put this in context, in the general struggle against the woke, which I think Prime Minister Netanyahu is bent on. Because Prime Minister Netanyahu is not just engaged in winning this war, he is also, as an intellectual, cognizant of the fact that this war plays a vital part in the worldwide struggle against the woke, and the way that we frame it is crucial for the whole of the West, not just for Israel's future. So, you probably know that the affidavit, that the response of the Prime Minister to Ronen Bar's affidavit has been published yesterday, and it has confirmed what we have been saying, at least I've been saying on my podcast since March 3rd. So I think we should start there. We now know what happened on the night before dawn broke on October 7. It was not just a mistake in analyzing intelligence data, but a whole worldview that led Chief of Shin Bet Ronen Bar to interpret accumulating signs of the gathering storm exactly backwards. He feared that Hamas was nervous about an impending Israeli attack. This seems to be the reason that on Bar's advice, the level of alert was not raised, and the soldiers in the bases around the fence were left to be slaughtered in their beds, unaware of the growing danger. The Nova Party, as you know, was also not dispersed. It seems that Bar was bent on reassuring Hamas that Israel was harboring no ill intent. He did this by exposing our jugular. It's just unbelievable. This is the way he wanted to signal Hamas that we are not on the offense. Long before the war, Bar had convinced himself that Hamas was moderating and that they wanted at least a prolonged hudna, a state of non-belligerent status quo. This is why he was one of the main advocates of stepping up economic concessions that would, he was sure, encourage what he believed to be the already dominant trend of moderation in Hamas circles. The flip side of this view was that Bar was always hyper-suspicious about the Israeli right, which is why under his leadership the Jewish division of the Shin Bet was so aggressive towards the settlers and so indifferent to their human rights. We were recently exposed to the shocking leaked telephone calls between the head of this division and Avishai Moalem, chief of the Judea and Samaria police. In these calls, the Shin Bet has been requesting months of administrative detention for settlers without a shred of evidence to go on. When Moalem protested, he was told by Shabak that he should create the appearance of a real investigation. Given Bar's instinctive sense that Israel, not Hamas, would be the source of trouble, it would not be far-fetched to speculate that this is why he did not wake up the Prime Minister on the night leading to the disaster. He probably worried that a hawkish Prime Minister would sound the alarm, thus reinforcing what he thought was Hamas's fear of an Israeli attack and possibly drag us all into what Bar must have thought of as an unintended escalation, possibly a regional war. We know this way of thinking because in Shin Bet parlance, there is a term for it, miscalculation. It was explained in the Prime Minister's affidavit. I recommend everyone to read it or read the translation of it to English. Miscalculation was their explanation for previous rounds of violence, which they thought were Israel's fault. Israel allegedly responded to ambiguous intel too aggressively and thus led to armed conflict which the Shin Bet assumed Hamas did not want. In retrospect, they were wrong all along in their interpretations. So you can now see the bigger picture. In Bar's mind, the Israeli right is the problem and the Palestinians are the solution. The Israeli right is the enemy of peace and Hamas is our future partner. He was standing on the night of the attack like all other nights with his back to Gaza and his face to Jewish settlers in Judea and Samaria. This is, in other words, the Oslo frame of mind. How can you still believe in Oslo after such an abysmal record of failure? You need to believe in the Palestinian partner, and therefore you have to assume that the collapse of the process was Israel's fault. Ergo, the right is the problem. This, I think, is Bar's basic worldview, and it still informs his behavior now. He refuses to obey the elected right-wing cabinet that dismissed him because he still sees his job as protecting us from the Israeli right, not from Hamas. You can hear this refrain in all the anti-Bibi protests. You can hear it, by the way, on Channel 12 from the mouth of Guy Peleg. Hamas will be able to deal with, but the real danger, they say over and over again, is Benjamin Netanyahu. Any sober observer of the international scene will recognize the underlying conception which such views are anchored in. We can say a woke conception for short, or we can say the post-colonial studies version, we can say the Edward Said view, or we can say identity politics or multiculturalism. All these lead directly to the same view of the conflict. Israel, being Western, is ipso facto the guilty side, and the Palestinians are naturally the colored victims. If you zoom out, you will see that the battle over how to frame the conflict and the war is embedded in the larger controversy now convulsing all democracy, a battle over the future of the credo of the West. This is why the battle over framing began as soon as the war itself began. All its components existed, in fact, before the war. The woke did not have to wait for Palestinian deaths, which we now were exposed, the lies were now exposed in the press. You can see it all over Twitter now. They did not have to wait for the Palestinian death count to know which party is guilty and which is the victim. Trained in post-colonial studies and versed in identity politics, hostility to Zionism is not just instinctive to the woke. It is the litmus test by which they decide who is on the right side of history. The Palestinians are, on this view, native people of color, and the Jews are European whites who colonized their land. With the dispossession of Native Americans now relegated to the past, slavery extinct in the West, and the European rule in the Far and Middle East long gone, only Zionism perpetuates Western sins. Israel is, on this view, a rearguard action of Western colonialism, the last vestige of a retrograde evil ideology. Demanding its destruction is therefore a ritual of atonement. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu understood full well that the battle over framing the war is one more act in the struggle over the legitimacy of Zionism. This means that insisting on the moral justification of the war is also a demand to scrape the whole map with which Western progressive elites make sense of the world, including their own domestic politics. Netanyahu therefore described the war in diametrically opposite terms, and we should pay attention to the exact terms that he used. Far from being a relic of the bad old colonial past, Israel is paving the way for a better future. It is a trailblazer. It is the front line of Western civilization in the war against barbarism. Here's the direct quote. "If you remember one thing from this speech," said Netanyahu, "remember this." It's his speech before the joint session of the two houses of Congress. "Our enemies are your enemies. Our fight is your fight. And our victory will be your victory." He reiterated similar themes in his UN speech, where he spoke of the savage murderers who are out to destroy our common civilization. This is the exact opposite of multicultural speak, where you respect the other side. The other side is not a civilization, they are barbarians. He also referred to the woke protesters against his presence on Capitol Hill and those carrying Gays for Gaza placards. "I have a message for these protesters, he said. When the tyrants of Tehran who hang gays from cranes and murder women for not covering their hair are praising, promoting, and funding you, you have officially become Iran's useful idiots. Wokeism is an autoimmune disease. It attacks our ability to defend our values. Its moral relativism first asserts the equality of all cultures, then lets anti-Western values into its midst through the gateway of boundless tolerance, and finally, it inverts anti-racist morality by using Western guilt to forbid any criticism of racist, misogynist, anti-gay, anti-Semitic, anti-Western ideologies, so long as those come from those who are designated and sanctified as victims. The damage it causes through this moral inversion is everywhere the same. It is what led British authorities to legitimize grooming gangs in the name of community relations. It is what led students to support the genocide of Jews in the name of anti-racism. It is what led courts to send rapists into women's jails, and what authorized the sterilization of children in the name of gender affirmation. It has also led the International Court in The Hague to argue that Israel, not Hamas, should be tried for genocide. It reached the height of absurdity with Judith Butler, a feminist oracle, defending the sadistic, barbarian rape and mutilation of Jewish women as armed resistance. Netanyahu's mission was, of course, not to argue the fine points of queer theory with Judith Butler or to point out the contradictions in Edward Said. But his instinct for calling out relativism went right to the heart of a global problem. This is not a clash of civilizations, he told Congress, referring to the famous book. It is a clash of barbarism with civilization. It is a clash between those who glorify death and those who sanctify life. final word. Not all values are created equal. We will not be able to defend ours if we continue to assume Obama-era sanitized language and talk about radical extremism instead of calling jihadi terrorists like Hamas and grooming gangs in Britain the murderers at the Charlie Hebdo journal in France or the assassins of gay director Theo van Gogh in Holland by the name that describes them as what they really are, barbarian jihadists, enemies of civilization. Israel is now fighting, thank you. Israel is now fighting not only against a military enemy, but also waging a cultural war against a constellation of lopsided human rights organizations, think tanks and NGOs, biased international tribunals, woke newspapers, media outlets and social media platforms, corrupt universities, and peace processors who are trying to tie our hands. We need to win the military war despite their best efforts to stop us, because it is crucial to demonstrate that liberal democracy indeed does not have to commit suicide. Thank you. I want to call the panelists. Alex, you want to introduce them? Okay, sure. Oh, you'll do it. Okay, great.
The only way to shift out of the old Concepcia model is to create a new one, a new set of organizing strategic goals that set the framework for moving forward. This isn't simple, but it is essential for Israel. Joining Gadi Taub, please welcome Chairman of the Netzach Israel Movement and former F-16 pilot, Shai Kalach, President of the Middle East Forum, Greg Roman, Chair of the Knesset's Constitution, Law, and Justice Committee, Knesset member Simcha Rothman, and President of Cherut, Amiad Cohen.
Now I can see the clock. I am honored to moderate this panel, except for Greg, which I would introduce to today. These are all my friends, so we'll have an Israeli-friendly kind of panel, by which I mean we will speak bluntly, I hope. So who are these people? Shai, I met Shai in the Knesset cafeteria for the first time when he began his crusade against the refuseniks in the Air Force. Shai is an F-16 combat pilot, an ex-kibbutznik. I was thrown out of pilot school, so I admire people like that. After a year, after almost crushing a Fuga, trying to, as Israelis do, trying to do a maneuver that I did not yet learn because I felt I was already a pilot, which I wasn't. Amiad Cohen, which you all know from Tikva, and is now the founder and CEO of the Center for Israeli Liberty. He, where's your weapon? You can be tried for that in the army, for leaving it there. Somebody put an eye on his M16. So Amiad is now embarked on a new mission, which, of course, is tied to the Concepcia, if you think of a deep state, of returning liberties to Israel's citizens. Simcha Rothman. Simcha Rothman is one of the two protagonists in the great drama of the judicial reform that is now on hold. It is now on hold. It has not gone away. But I knew Simcha long before that in the organization that he founded, Atnu'a Lemeshilut V'Demokratia. How do you translate that?
The Israeli Movement for Governability and Democracy.
Has now published an amazing study of how the Supreme Court pretends not to interfere with security policy, but does. and we will speak about that too. And Greg, I was introduced to today. Greg Hoenlein is the Executive Director of the Middle East Forum and also a former official of Israel's Foreign Ministry and the Ministry of Defense. So why don't we start with you, Greg? And since you have been in the bowels of the monster, you have seen the Conceptia in operation. What is the alternative, and how can we get there?
So I think that if we look at 4 or 5 key critical moments in Israel's security history, whether it be the Six-Day War, the Yom Kippur War, 1982, the rise of the Second Intifada, 2006 with Lebanon, every instance brought us to the edge of imminent disaster. But we were able to pull back right at the last moment. And then when our forces won, or in some cases were mired in occupation for 18 years, like in the case of Lebanon, we then had a state commission of inquiry or some sort of body for reform or for introspection. And we said, after 73, the intelligence system must be refined. After 82, we're going to learn about asymmetrical warfare against a non-state actor. After the Second Intifada, we're going to refine counterterrorism strategies. So when you look at October 7th and what the Conceptia was prior to this moment, 14 years of essentially trying to allow individuals like Ronen Bar and other members of the security establishment, some who are now members of Knesset, and even one who fancied himself as an alternative prime minister, and other members of the coalition right now who are currently in control, had to ask hard questions of whether it was worth the policy of trying to buy quiet through economic concessions, inviting enemy actors in like the Qataris, like the Turks, allowing for there to be silence but for a price, which was hundreds of millions of dollars going to underwrite the construction of a terror apparatus in Gaza, strengthening these movements in the West Bank, and allowing the construction of a 7-front field in which Israel had to start fighting the morning of October 7th. So what happens moving forward? There's a few pillars that have to be addressed on this. Rather than having a policy where you will mow the lawn in a place like Gaza, you must salt the earth. Rather than having a policy which seeks to have violence paired with equal violence, or just a little bit more to deter your enemy, you must have total violence, absolute warfare, forcing the enemy to surrender rather than declaring victory because you think the time to fight is over. And I have a few other things, but maybe we could do this more in conversation rather than remarks.
Is this a timing for the full panel? You each have 14 seconds, so why don't you, Simcha, summarize your thoughts in an acronym?
I think the main issue that Israel has to deal with is, and it's true in security, and we saw, and there is a saying that everyone is conservative in issues that he knows something about. So you can allow yourself to be progressive or to go with obscure kind of thinking in issues that you know nothing about. When you know something about the issue, then the facts matter, and you cannot lie to all the people all the time. For many, many years, I was never, we spoke before on the F-16 and the M-16 that is there somewhere. I wasn't big on security issues when I grew up. It's not something that I wasn't, I was a chaplain in the IDF. I was never a fighter. And I assumed, okay, so probably the people that are doing something on security, they know what they're doing. I was trying to learn about the justice system, and whenever I looked on what they're doing, I said, oh my God, is this the way that the Supreme Court behaves? Is this the way the Attorney General behaves? If this is the kind of legal thinkings that they apply, oh, that's terrible, that needs to be fixed. And then came October 7th. And even people like me understood that the same kind of, I have to say, rot that existed in the justice system exists basically in all systems. In all systems of the State of Israel. We cannot lie to ourselves anymore. And not on security policy, and not on the efficiency of government, and not on the rule of law. Israel was never a rule of law country, never. But we have to be one, because we cannot have the constant bargaining that maybe was good enough when you were a non-state, or you were running a shtetl in Europe, so you can bargain.
What Erel Segel calls a deep shtetl.
A deep shtetl, exactly. Exactly. See what's happening now. You mentioned it with Ronen Bar, the head of the Shin Bet. The government tells him, go away. And he says, okay, let's bargain. I'll go away tomorrow. I'll go away in 2 weeks. I'll go away in 2 months. I want this guy to replace me. I don't get it. Go away. No. Let's bargain. It's like in Monty Python. No, we have to bargain. We have to argue on the price. We cannot have security establishment working like this. We cannot have a judicial, any kind of establishment. We cannot do. So to set the rules for Israel, to make sure that the will of the people through elections is being translated in a clear and transparent way, so we will vote our shared friend, I think he's friends with almost everyone here in the panel, Erez Tadmor, and the books that he wrote, why do you vote right and get left? In Israel, the answer, I used to think, why do you vote right and get left? I thought the answer is the Supreme Court, the Attorney General. The answer is much more complicated. It's the security establishment. It's the lack of accountability. It's the lack of responsibility, and we have to make sure that we change it. Judicial reform, if you will, is how to do it in the justice system. We need a judicial reform in the justice system. We need a security reform, and the same applying idea must be present everywhere. You are responsible to the people, because we are a democratic and Jewish state.
Thank you, Simcha. So there's the sociology and the ideology. If I hear correctly, what Greg said is we have to change our operating system to one that wins wars. And what I hear Simcha saying is we can't change the operating systems if we don't get rid of our our operating system, of the sociology. So, Amiad, you've been working in the realm of ideas. Is that a leverage from which we can begin to change the trap that we're in?
Actually, I want to be a little bit more optimistic. First of all, it's your mistake. It's not an M16, it's an M4. I came back for the northern border, and I have some good news that I want to share with you, and being a little bit more optimistic regarding to the security world. So, yes, there are a lot of changes because it's based, as you said, on ideas and sociology, the people who are running it. And I think the leading people of the IDF and the security establishment today are from the old guard, and they're the leftovers of the old guard. And the important thing that is happening in the security establishment is since the mid-'80s, the beginning of the '90s, a different generation of fighters and generals, they started as soldiers in the '80s and '90s, but today they're already the generals, and there is an alternative, a positive alternative, mostly in the people, in social fabric of the people who are leading. If you know the people, the brigadier generals who are fighting the war in Gaza and up in the north, they are conservative, traditional, based in a very an intuitive, strong, pro-Zionist, pro-Israel, as you expect to have. They're not in the general level yet, but they're getting there in the next couple of years. The second part, that's the social part of it. The second part is the world of ideas, and yes, there's an alternative now. We have a group of fellows sitting and writing an alternative national security strategy for Israel, but you need to understand what the conception was and what's the alternative for that. So the conception started by defining the Israeli forces, armed forces, as Israeli defense forces. Think about it. It's not an attack force. It's a defense force. When you think you're only here to defend, and it comes from a moral background that we don't have the time now to elaborate about that, but yeah. So the basic is it's immoral to win and be victorious against your enemies, to destroy them. It's immoral, because we're here only to defend our local shtetl, as he said, here, and we want to live here in a small place without fighting our enemies. But when you are a mature country and you understand you have enemies who want to kill you, you have to destroy them. So the premise of this, the IDF in this war, backed on 67, as he said, 73 and 82, and a lot of mistakes we did in the past, is we're not allowed to win the war. And winning an asymmetric war needs to have two basic pillars. One is occupying territory. That's the way to lose. Your enemy understands he loses, and definitely a jihadist Islamist one, not because he loses his soldiers, but because he loses land. Or the other one is losing his control on the people. So the first day of the war, Herzl Halevi came to the government and said, there's two things that I'm never going to do. I'm never going to occupy territory on the Gaza Strip, and I'm never going to control Palestinians in Gaza. So that definition comes, I'm here to defend the state of Israel, but I'm not willing to win the war. The new generation of leaders have to say two things. We will always occupy enemy territory, either to negotiate or to withhold. And the second thing is that a government, a regime, a state, a terror organization has control on people who will attack Israel, will lose its governance, and will never control its own people, never again.
Hear, hear. I don't know if you've heard Shai speak. He's the combination of offense rather than defense with a calm tone is very, very effective in the media. Shai, you have 3 minutes, and then I would ask each of you to crystallize your message into one slogan sentence, and then we'll end. Shai.
Thank you so much.
Brigadier General Shai.
Thank you so much. What?
הדרגה שלך באנגלית?
Major.
Major General.
Thank you. I feel like in an F-16 cockpit. First of all, I have to look to answer your question and look into your eyes. I have to maneuver between respect the audience, and secondly, there is no time like in an F-16 cockpit, so I'll try to. Okay, so just as a preface, you call this session building a new conceptia. In Hebrew, there is no word conception, just a conceptia. In English, conception has two meanings, a wrong meaning and right meaning. But in Hebrew, conceptia is just wrong. So what is the flawed conception? The assumption that there is no enemy at all. On the other side of the fence, there is only a friend there. And if there is no enemy, at least not a conventional enemy, who would like to invade Israel, so you have to minimize your army to be a very, very tiny army, but smart. An army that cannot be won. And more than that, if there is a friend on the other side of the fence, you need to protect your enemy, your friend. So how do you protect your friend? By legal constraints. You are not allowed to attack if there is any casualties as a result of your striking. You cannot attack if there is a lot of buildings that are about to collapse because of your striking. And you cannot attack if there is no validation to the targets. In other words, if they are not validated as part of terror organizations. And you are not allowed to attack unless you warn first the terrorists. The procedure called knocking on the roof. So,
knock on roof.
Knock on the roof, yeah. So, by the way, in Hebrew, there is a word which cannot be translated to English, like aliyah, hasbara. Do you know what's hasbara? It's always about justification, justify your existence. So how did we get to this flawed conception? By misunderstanding our destiny. As long we actually constantly, permanently prefer the, after 2,000 years in the exile, to come here only to build a safe haven, which is a very good cause, it cannot last forever, for eternity. That's, by the way, the name Netzach Israel. So you always justify your existence. Once you justify your existence, you always trying to bring peace. Peace, it's a good word, but as long as you try to thrive toward peace, you won't get peace.
Shai, you're a pilot. You're now over the target.
Okay, so a lot of ramifications, a lot of consequences, but the most important one, I mean, they look, the leadership, the military leadership, the political leadership look over, you know, like terror attacks, again, like a lone wolf perpetrators did it. But the most important one is the tendency of the nations of the world toward Israel. We receive sympathy from the Trump administration not because of apology, but because they look upon the shared values and mission of Israel. People like Mike Hagee actually think in exactly the opposite of the ruling elite in Israel. So the more we frame our destiny, the more we embrace our destiny, the more we get the world conscious upon Israel. So,
Sentence. משפט אחרון.
yeah, last sentence. So I call on the Jews of the world to move. We need to transform the public consciousness. So I call on the Jews of the world to move from a consciousness of apology, of safe haven, to a consciousness of destiny, a consciousness of ownership.
Brilliant. Thank you. Shai, there is a third meaning of conception in English, but I feel this is not the right panel for it. So, one last sentence from each of you.
Some nations excel at cuisine, some others succeed in tourism. Israel succeeds in being blindsided by enemies who openly declare their intent. The ability for us to move forward from that means adopting lethality, injecting paranoia and psychological terror, and moving into offense whenever we're at the precipice of fighting a war, not after the war begins.
Thank you. Simcha, you're a lawyer, but think like a copywriter.
I'll try. We are, when we are building a system of government, the saying is you need to build a wise system even for stupid people. Israel has a stupid system for wise people, and what we actually need is a wise system for wise people. And this is not a new conception. We need the old conception, because that's what it says in Sefer Dvarim. It says, I gave you rules, observe them carefully, for they will show your wisdom and understanding to the nations who will hear about all these decrees and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. People that look in Israel today, and specifically on Israeli laws, cannot say this word. We need to make sure that they can.
Thank you. Mishpat echad amiyad, last sentence.
I spent the last 270 days since October 7th on the northern border, and I said to Caroline Glick on JNS, one of the podcasts, she interviewed me and said, we have two options, either the third Lebanese war or the last one. Unfortunately, because of the conception, we chose the third one, and I believe, unfortunately, we will have another cycle with Lebanon and other places. We have to start choosing to have the last war with Gaza, the last war with Hezbollah, the last war with the Palestinians, and have the ability to imagine what I call Pax Israeliana, a peace in the region because of the strength of Israel, not because of the weakness of ours.
Thank you. I don't want to sound like moderating death row, but last words, Shai, please.
Actually, to build a new conception, to build a new conceptia, we have a lot of work to do. You know that Jabalia, it's a neighborhood in Gaza, has been conquered 5 times. Herzl Levi, when he was a chief of staff, when he was a general, he canceled the processes to conquer Gaza Strip. So in order to build a new conceptia, we have a lot of work to do. First, we need to move aside the flawed conception, and we need to transform the public to a new consciousness of destiny. That's it.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Greg Roman. Thank you, the honorable esteemed gentlemen from Vadat HaChukah, Simcha Rotman, Amiad Cohen, and Shai Kalach.
The powerful wake-up of October 7th is rooted in tragedy. Over 1,200 killed, thousands injured, and over 250 taken hostages. Each life is worth an entire world to the Jewish people. To share personal and policy perspectives, please welcome Zvika Moore, whose son Eitan Moore was kidnapped while working as a security guard at the Nova Festival on October 7th and remains in captivity. Zvika is the co-founder of the Tikva Forum, an alternative to the dangerous anti-government hostage families forum. And I also welcome Kochav El-Kayam Levy, chair of the Civil Commission of October 7th Crimes Against Women and Children.
Hello everyone, Shalom and Chodesh Tov. Thank you for having me. I am the father of Eitan, who is still being held captive by Hamas, and who, in less than a month, will celebrate his second birthday in captivity. Our days are very difficult as a hostage family, but we are strong and optimistic and praying for our son and for good days for the people of Israel. I didn't come this morning to ask for mercy, but to remind all of us who the people of Israel are. Let's start with my family. We live in Hebron, which is the second most important and holiest place for the Jewish people. Our fathers and mothers are buried in Hebron, and King David began his reign in Hebron 7 years before he was a king in Jerusalem. This place gives us a right and strength to deal with our terrible condition. Our son Eitan is our eldest of 8 children, 4 boys and 4 girls. On October 7, Eitan was a security guard at the Nova Festival, saving dozens of people from certain death until he was kidnapped at 12:30. The last thing we know Eitan did was take the body of a girl who had been raped and murdered and bury her in a nearby pit. This is Eitan's character: courage, determination, and concern for others. We know Eitan is alive, and we expect to see him soon, but we are still at war with an enemy who wants to destroy us. Eitan is a great-grandson of my grandparents, most of whom were in concentration camps and survived the Holocaust. Like the Bibas family, the Nazis murdered my grandfather's wife and 2 young children. After the Holocaust, he remarried my grandmother. My grandparents came from Hungary and Romania. My wife's grandparents came from Germany and Romania. How did they know to return to the land of Israel, a place they'd never been? The answer is written in our Bible, which we gave to all humanity. This is the source of our right of this land. Since the Romans expelled us from our land, we have not stopped davening and dreaming about our land. At least 3 times a day, we daven and ask God to bring us back here. At every Jewish wedding, we mention Jerusalem. And so far, hundreds of generations, the Jewish people have passed on the memory of this land, and especially the memory of our capital city, Jerusalem. For almost 4,000 years, They have tried to destroy us and have not succeeded. We do not exist because of history. We exist in spite of history. There is no horror in the world that we have not gone through. Through the Babylonians, the Crusades, the Inquisitions, and the Holocaust. Here we are, a strong and prosperous nation. This is one volume of the Talmud, printed in Berlin in 1862. And it is Holocaust survivor, more precisely, a Kristallnacht survivor. And it tells the story of us, of the Jewish people. Millions of us may be killed and burned, but the Jewish nation will remain forever. We are not a people that exist for his own sake. On the first day of our Jewish calendar, we daven for the benefit of all humanity. Even today, facing the new Nazis in Gaza, we are the messengers of humanity to destroy them. This war must end in such a way that Hamas is destroyed and surrendered, and all the hostages returned to us. The state of Israel cannot accept a situation where the hostages are back and Hamas returns to control the Gaza Strip. Therefore, we at the Tikva Forum will never call to end this war and surrender to Hamas. Never. Before the war, at our Shabbat table, my children asked me, "Daddy, what was a Shalit deal? What happened there?" And I told them. A discussion began between the children about whether to release terrorists or not. In the end, Eitan told us, "If I'm taken hostage during the reserve, I will not allow you to release me in exchange for terrorists." This is the education in our family. We know Eitan as a strong and optimistic guy, and we are confident that he will hold up and hope that very soon we will be able to hug him when he returns to us. Thank you for listening, and good news for all of us. Chodesh Tov.
For decades, Jewish groups have been lobbying hard to find connections with liberal groups, both in the United States and around the world. And we were shocked to find, after October 7th, how many of those groups did not come to the defense of the Jewish people. In particular, now to discuss some of these issues, I'd like to welcome Kochav Eliakam Levy, Chair of the Civil Commission on October 7th Crimes Against Women and Children.
Dear friends, colleagues, honorable guests, I look around this room and I see so many faces that I know, so many who made a choice to stand against this unprecedented tide of hatred and fight for justice. Not because anyone asked us, not because it was easy, but because we knew we had to act. Because we knew we had to act. We understood that silence in the face of evil is not neutrality. It is a form of violence in itself. I stand before you today after a month of painful documentation, carrying with me the voices of hundreds of victims, voices that now, more than ever, demand our actions. Since October 7th, we have lived through a rupture. Not only the destruction of lives and family, but a deeper rupture, a tearing of a moral fabric that binds humanity. Civilians were massacred, sexual violence was used systematically, acts of terror were carried out with a cruelty so personal that is beyond comprehension. In those first moments, we did not yet know the full scale of the horror. We only knew that women's voices and the voices of so many others were already being buried beneath hatred, denial, and indifference. And so I acted. We acted. We did not hesitate. We did not hesitate, not for one moment. I often say that we walked into fire. The most challenging part of our work continues to be the exposure to the traumatizing materials. We chose to stare into the face of evil, to see what our brothers, sisters, and children have endured. But nothing prepared us to what we uncovered. While documenting the sexual atrocities, we identified systematic torture of families, revealing a new horror, a new crime against humanity, a crime that had never been defined. I often say, if there is hell, this is what it looks like: someone abusing your kin, your loved ones, in front of your eyes. We found ourselves almost unable to bear witness to these atrocities, but we knew we had to continue. As we listened and bore witness, chilling patterns emerged. The same cruelty, repeated across different places, different families, different moments, parents murdered before their children's eyes, children executed while held in their parents' arms, families burned alive together, entire families taken hostage, separated violently, again and again. And it did not end there. Hamas used the victims' own phones and social media accounts to broadcast their torture and death directly to their loved ones. It wasn't one creative terrorist that thought it would be cruel to send a mother the image of her son's murdered body. Let's be clear, families were not random victims, they were the target. Hamas understood that torturing families creates a suffering so deep, a grief without end. The goal became clear: to inflict a level of psychological terror so profound that it would echo across generations, tear apart the very foundations of our society. It was and remains family-targeted terror. And so together with Professor Erwin Kotler, we gave this evil a name: kinocide. Kin as in familial relations, side for the systemacity of it. Hamas weaponized the most sacred human bond. Naming it was not an academic exercise. It was an act of moral necessity, because terrorism is evolving. If there is one thing I want to say clearly today and echo loudly across the world, it is this: without urgent recognition, family-targeted terror risks becoming a blueprint for others to follow. Terrorist organizations around the world are watching. The absence of consequences normalizes the destruction of families as a weapon of war. When families are weaponized, entire societies are at risk everywhere. And this terror is not over. It is a crime still unfolding while our hostages are still being held in Gaza. On a personal note, I also want to share that this work is not only about documenting and fighting these crimes, it is also about giving victims the language to express their suffering. Just recently, I received a phone call from a father who had been forced to watch a horrific video of his daughter. He told me, "I've been through hell, and for the first time I felt understood. I felt that someone saw me, that someone understood that it is different to see your child murdered. Recognition matters, language matters, justice demands both." But recognizing family-targeted terror and naming kinocide is only the first step. We must act, and we must act with vision. This leads me to the second urgent mission, the establishment of a hybrid international tribunal to prosecute the crimes of October 7th. I want to say here that domestic courts alone are not enough. Existing frameworks here in Israel cannot fully address the magnitude of these crimes. They demand a response that matches their gravity, a response that ensures the world knows. A hybrid court for October 7th can deliver more than justice. It can deliver history, memory. Seated in Israel, supported by global leaders, moral allies, it would allow survivors to take the stand, confront their assailants, and speak the truth. The Nuremberg trials were not inevitable. They were a bold choice. I want to remind us that. They defined how humanity would remember evil and how it would respond. A hybrid court for October 7 can do the same, because it is not just about punishing perpetrators, it's about drawing a clear moral line. Without such tribunal, we risk allowing genocide, sexual violence, and atrocities against civilians here in Israel to fade into history, or worse, to be denied and forgotten. Israel stands at a legal and moral crossroads, but we're not alone. Those who believe in human dignity, in the sanctity of life, and in the promise of justice stand by our side. And I believe, and I promise you, justice will prevail. We just need to keep doing our best, knowing that even the smallest acts of courage can bend the arc of history toward justice. Lastly, I hold in my heart the prayer that our hostages may soon celebrate their own exodus to freedom. May they come home now. We must bring them home now. Thank you.
The first major priority for Israel today is to win the war and to reset the security order within Israel and in the immediate neighborhood. To address these challenges, please welcome CEO of the Israel Defense and Security Forum, Amir Avivi, retired General and Commander of the Israeli Air Force, Amikam Norkin, currently a Distinguished Fellow at JINSA, Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserve, Sarit Zahavi, founder and president of the Alma Research and Education Center, and JNS military analyst, Yaakov Lapin. They sit in conversation with former IDF spokesman and major in the IDF Reserves, Doron Spielman. Doron is the host of True East on JNS TV.
Before we begin speaking about national security, I want to once again thank the previous two speakers, Zvika and Kochav. It shows in Israel, when you're speaking about national security, this isn't something that affects people that are living 4,000 miles away along a broad sea. It's something that affects us at home. The decisions that Israel makes on national security, we all know, we feel them the next day. So thank you to the two of you. We don't have a whole lot of time in our national security panel, as we can see with the numbers ticking, and I want to jump right in. Last Saturday, just 2 days ago, the U.S. concluded the third round of its talks with Iran on Iran's nuclear program. While nothing firm was announced, both sides said there were progress. In fact, President Trump said just yesterday that he thinks a deal is going to be made. Furthermore, we know, and President Trump confirmed, that Israel had an aerial strike planned 2 weeks ago, which he asked that Israel hold off on in order to enable the diplomatic process to continue. Also, on Saturday, you had a massive explosion, the largest in its history, at the Iranian port of Bandar Abbas, which released sodium perchlorate into the atmosphere, which really has no other use except for that of solid fuel, which was used in the ballistic missiles that were fired at Israel, and God forbid in the chance of a nuclear attack against Israel, that is the material that would be used. I want to put a hypothesis in front of us, and I'd like each of you to take some time to answer it. You are the Minister of Defense, each of you. The United States and Iran have concluded and agreed upon a nuclear agreement. At the same time, Israeli intelligence tells you that they have strong indications that Iran is continuing their enrichment and they will shortly have a bomb. Do you trust the agreement and ask Israel to restrain itself? Or do you decide to act against Iran, even if that means acting unilaterally? The first, I would like to ask Major General Norkin, who led the Israeli Air Force and carried out truly some of the most historic missions. In fact, I think it's important to say you are one of the only people on earth that has planned and carried out an attack on a nuclear facility in 2007. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for having me here. As you mentioned, we did it twice, 81 and 2007, but those were completely different stories because there were, at that time, only one target with a quite simple enemy system. The situation now is much more complex. In those days, we are fighting Iran. Yesterday, the Air Force attacked in the Dahia, in Beirut, a storage of precise missiles which can be launched from the land to the sea. Very high priority target. This is the reason, although that there is a ceasefire, we attacked in Beirut. Those missiles produced in Iran. Yesterday, we intercept a cruise missile in our eastern border, been launched from Yemen. So we're still acting every day. And about your question, I think that even if I am not the minister, I think that we cannot accept a military or nuclear threat in Iran. So this is let's say, the right line. We cannot accept it and should do what we need to do to avoid any nuclear threat from Iran.
Thank you. Amir.
Yeah, before I answer the question, I want to say that, you know, when Obama was elected, a month after he was elected, I was a brigade commander on the Egyptian border, and I had a donor that landed with his chopper in the brigade. He goes into my office, he never met me before, and the first thing he says to me, "Colonel, what do you think about President Obama?" I was all excited. I looked at him, I said, you know, I studied American history for my bachelor's degree, and I studied about presidents that died 100 years ago, and they're still debating whether they're good or bad. So what do you want me to say about somebody who was elected a month ago? But I'll say this, and I said that the first months of Obama. Obama had only two choices, either be Churchill or Chamberlain. And I think that President Trump is exactly in the same junction. He is dealing with Iran. It's okay to do diplomacy. You don't go to a full-scale war, or you don't attack massively a country before trying to really reach a diplomatic agreement. If this agreement will mean the complete dismantling of their nuclear sites and enrichment capabilities, amazing achievement. It's always better to do it diplomatically and not a war. But if America is going to cede to the Iranians and they are going to continue enriching uranium or moving towards nuclear capabilities, this is very bad news. And in this scenario, Israel will have no choice but take matters in its hand. We are going to defend ourselves by ourselves. They will never, ever have nuclear capabilities.
Sarit.
I think time is up. I think now is the time. to take bold decisions. I'm very disappointed from yesterday's statement by President Trump. I think after watching all these years of deals, resolutions, and other legal documents that were made in the region, either the nuclear deal or My Business is Lebanon and UNIFIL and all of this, they have the tendency to be phrased in a way that everybody can understand them in a different way. And if I'm going back to the previous nuclear deal, we were promised that the sanctions about the nuclear issue will be removed if Iran will sign the deal. But the Iranians were not satisfied with this. The Iranians, right after signing this deal, Khamenei declared to his own people in Persian that if all sanctions with human rights, missiles program, terror support, all sanctions will not be removed, Iran will consider the deal as cancelled. This was not published, hardly published in Western media, and nobody looked at that. We should all understand the main lesson of October 7th is that our capability to understand the crucial point of change of intentions of our enemies is very limited. We are now in a point that we are putting our security, strategic security of the State of Israel and actually of the West in analyzing the intentions and the state of mind of Khamenei making a decision to create the first bomb. Because the capability is there. Can we trust that? Do we want to trust that? And one last point, maybe two last points. Now is the time because the Shiite axis is broken. It's not eliminated, but it's broken. We should not wait until it will be rebuilt, and then it will be more problematic and more dangerous. And my last point is, the nuclear capabilities of Iran are not the problem of the State of Israel. They are also the problem of the State of Israel. We shouldn't do this alone. We shouldn't be in this alone. We shouldn't fight by ourselves. We should make sure that the West is standing with us and the jets in the sky are not only Israeli jets.
Yaakov.
Well, I think my co-panelists really covered the basis here, but I'll just add a few extra thoughts. Look, the Iranian nuclear program is far, far too advanced. They have 60% enriched uranium, which is to enrich to military-grade uranium, which is 90%, from 60% is very little effort by the Iranians. They're almost there in terms of how much uranium they need for a first bomb. In fact, according to mainstream estimates, if they were to take the 60% uranium and go to 90% weapons-grade uranium, it would take them a week to have enough uranium for a first bomb. That doesn't mean that they are a week away from having a nuclear weapon because they still have to put together a warhead, but they are far, far too close. So what is to be done? Well, look, I think General Noor can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think 2022 was the year that the Israeli Air Force prioritized its readiness for a strike on Iran, where there was really intensive efforts to make sure that munitions, intelligence, refueling capabilities, and the ability of the Israeli Air Force to independently reach Iran and strike those nuclear programs was refined. I'm sure that since then there have been many more drills, simulations. Israel can do the job. Obviously, if the Americans joined this strike, it would be far, far better because they have very heavy bunker busters that can be dropped from strategic bombers, those B-2s that we've heard about in Diego Garcia and other assets that the Americans have moved into the region. But if push comes to shove, I think that Israel can do this alone. And I think that it's important for the entire world, and certainly the Trump administration, which I suspect already knows this, but either way it will probably find out, The art of the deal does not apply to jihadists. Not Shiite jihadists in Iran, not Sunni jihadists in the Gaza Strip. It doesn't work. It never did work, and it will not work. So I think that a strike is going to be inevitable. It's a question of when and not if, and hopefully Israel will not be alone. But if it has to be alone, then it will do this alone. That's my view.
General, I'd like your reaction to what Yaakov just said about the readiness of the Israeli Air Force from 2022 and the ability of Israel to carry this out alone.
Well, I think that the Air Force understand that this is part of his mission for more than 2 years, since 2010. And I think that the Air Force already demonstrate some of his capabilities in Lebanon and also in Iran. But we all should understand that it's not, let's say, a standalone mission. It will be a campaign, a war. It's not a one mission. For example, like we attacked the Syrian nuclear reactor, or we destroy Nasrallah headquarters. Once we are going to decide to do it, we should understand that we enter to a war. It won't be short. Thanks.
Question, Amir. As the Major General said, it would ignite a war. For many of us here, we feel we're already at war. Could you draw a distinction?
No, we are in a war, and I think it's time Israel sets a clear goal of war, of what he wants to achieve in Iran, because the Prime Minister is saying all the time that we'll never allow Iran to be nuclear. I think that because, and I agree, that if Israel attacks alone, it will prolong the campaign, it will be longer. This is why it's so important that if we go on a military strike, it will be together with the U.S. And I think that the message that we're sending the U.S. is that a massive airstrike, an Israeli-American airstrike or campaign, short campaign, because then it will be much shorter, on Iran, it's not the beginning of a war. It's ending the war. It's bringing down the collapse of the Shia axis. And if President Trump is looking at this vision of a Western Israeli moderate Sunni alliance that will extend all the way to Indonesia, if we want to counter both the Shia axis and the radical Sunnis, it's crucial to hit the Iranians and bring down their, not only their nuclear sites, by the way, but also their military capabilities, their missiles and so on. And of course, we need massive air defense, and it's not only Israel, it's with all the capabilities that the U.S. brings to help defend Israel, and not only Israel, Saudi Arabia, Emirates, and other countries that are part of this coalition. So we'll have to wait and see what happens with these discussions. I can tell you that we in IDSF, we did a research this last week on the Iranian formal media and the ministers in the Iranian regime, what they were saying. They were laughing at the U.S. They feel that they are having the upper hand. They feel that this is Obama all over again. And I think that if they'll play around with the Trump administration, I'm hoping that at a certain point the president will understand who he's dealing with. And I agree, you cannot deal with jihadists. We need to hit them and destroy their sites.
Yaakov, please.
Yeah, just really quickly, a few extra points to take into account. Why it's different now than it was before. If we're talking about a strike, a potential strike on Iran, nobody's asking what Hamas is going to do. Very few people are asking what Hezbollah is going to do, rain down all those thousands of rockets on the Israeli home front. Those scenarios are out. Sure, Hezbollah can fire a number of rockets at northern Israel, but the fact is that Iran has lost most of the capabilities of its proxies. The ring of fire that it built around Israel, that ring of fire has largely been dismantled. And that means that they're exposed. The head of the snake is exposed. and its air defenses have been severely degraded by the incredible operation of the Israeli Air Force in Iran, over Iran, in October of 2024, when the IAF demonstrated that it could operate anywhere in Iran. So I think the Iranian regime is more vulnerable today than it has been in many, many years.
Last question. Each person's going to take 15 seconds so that Alex smiles at us when we're done. Do you believe if an agreement is reached that Iran will stop enriching uranium?
I will start, with your permission.
Ladies first, please.
I don't think this is the question. Like Margaret Thatcher said, this is not the question you wanted to ask. Because I don't think it matters. The Iranians are running a marathon. It doesn't matter if they will stop enriching uranium for a year or 2 years or 5 years. What matters is the strategic situation around it. Last time, maybe they did. But meanwhile, they took over Syria. They created the Ring of Fire. They created capabilities to invade with Hamas and Hezbollah. What are we going to do? We are going to give them a recess with the nuclear issue, allegedly a recess, and at the same time enable them to rebuild capabilities, other capabilities that can create another October 7th, and then go back richer and stronger to the nuclear program? What is this? Now it's the golden opportunity to truly change the reality. And the nuclear issue is part of this.
Amir.
I think that what Prime Minister Netanyahu mentioned is the viable path for a diplomatic solution, and this is the Libyan example. Physically, American forces physically going into these nuclear sites and dismantling them. I don't trust the Iranians at all. And the question is, if you want them to do it, how do you monitor this? You need to be physically on the ground and do the job and dismantle these nuclear sites. Without that, it's useless.
General.
I think that in the long term, we should look that we are looking to change the regime, not just to destroy the military, because we would like to see a different regime in Iran. And I think we can achieve it.
Thank you. I want to thank all of our panelists for joining us, and thank you all for braving security challenges. As we know, when you come to Israel, people think you're crazy, but the people sitting on this panel are truly people who have spent their lives defending the state of Israel. Thank you.
I don't usually do this, but I want to respond for 10 seconds to this panel. First of all, the question about whether there's going to be a war, only whether Iran gets nuclear weapons or would get nuclear weapons. We're in a 7-front war because of Iran. Iran has crossed every single red line. Iran has fired 300 ballistic missiles at Israel, the largest ballistic missile attack in the history of the world. Every justification for taking out all of their military capabilities, including their nuclear, has already been reached. And the last point is, much worse than whatever weapons capabilities they have are the people that would have their fingers on the button. They are the root of the problem, and until the root of the problem is solved, we're not going to be safe in the Middle East. While winning on the battlefield is critical, as we see, the war is being fought on multiple battlefronts. This is the battle of politics, diplomacy, and information. While billions are being poured into the military battle, we may be misunderstanding and underestimating the soft war that Israel must win. For more, I present my dear friend, Yossi Hollander, one of the pioneers of Israel's software industry, impact philanthropist, and chairman of the Israeli Institute for Economic Planning, Yossi Hollander.
Can I have the presentation, please? Thank you. I'm going to start by introducing a new concept, technological concept to this conference and presentation. So what is the soft war? There's one goal: eliminate the world support for Israel, with the primary goal, eliminate US support for Israel, with the assumption when that happens, Israel will be in serious trouble. That is the goal. It's been going on for 30 years. It's a slow process. Now it's very fast. It could be something within 4 years even. It is right around the corner. We have actually, for the first time, enemies that are countries, okay? Not organizations. And this is dangerous. Every time the Jewish people had countries fighting against them in that way, we lost. And I can go along history. So here are the main countries: Iran, Qatar. We have the Progressive as an organization. We'll talk about that too, China and Russia, and we'll run through them pretty quickly. So Iran has a unit, probably more than 10,000 people, for the soft war. It's not just against Israel, it's against the West, it's against the Jews, and it's against Israel. And this unit is kind of working by itself. I'm not going to go through all the points, but sometimes during, like in October 8, a few thousand, in October 8, a few thousand Iranian went on an airplane to Malaysia and Indonesia to ready-made stations, workstations, where they started activating all their social media war against Israel. That was all planned and ready. Did Israel do anything? Did we bomb them? Did we burn them? Did we even know? Yes, some people in Israel knew, but not the officials. NGOs knew. Now, most of the traffic against Israel were bots, not real people. Again, did Israel activate its cyber capability? No. So the next actor is actually the most dangerous actor against Israel. Qatar is not just against Israel. Qatar regime has two goals. The first one is survival. The second one is infiltrate the world with their ideology. Part of their ideology is anti-Semitic by its definition. The Muslim Brotherhood, by its core definition, is anti-Semitic. This is their definition. This is their charter, we can call it, okay? And they want to take down Israel, and they want to take down all the Jews in the world as well. And they want to take down the West. We're talking about a small tribe of 250,000 people with trillions in their hand, and they're using it against us. So one of the issues that we can talk about is that they do it for what soft means. They put billions of dollars in universities. They build an Islamic education system around the world. They have strategic investment. They invest in legitimization. For example, they own sports teams. Their idea is, and I'm not talking about what they do to bribe people. I mean, there's been a lot of stories and a lot of discoveries about who they bribe, but there's an open bribery that is happening around us. They're investing. And they're investing even with people that we're dealing with daily. So we have to be very, very aware. They are out in the open. They increased their funding a few 100% in the last 4 years. So we all talk about universities, and I'm not going to go about it because you heard about it before, but they are investing heavily in K-12. They're just in the last year and a half established dozens of new companies and organizations in the United States to insert anti-Israel, anti-Jewish ideology into the K-12 education system. Something that was exposed recently by ISGAP, a program in Brown University full of anti-Israeli messages, educating that is used by 8,000 schools in the United States. This is no coincidence. They're going after the young generation. So when they come to universities, which are already lost, okay, they will already be brainwashed. Qatar also influences the media. They practically control CNN. CNN is subsidiary of Qatar. But the big issue is AJ+. Most of you don't know what AJ+ is, but it's a social media platform that is now number 3 in the world in the United States under 25 years old. It's full of anti-Semitic messages. 10 to 20% of the content is anti-Semitic. This is what the kids in the United States are looking at all the time. They also have a network of Al Jazeera offices around the world, and because of the structure of the world, today people are receiving their messages from newsrooms that Al Jazeera provided the contents to. We are losing in all media war, in all newsroom around the world. People don't have the money. It's the cheapest to get it is from Qatar. Qatar is setting the message worldwide. There's another actor called China. Chinese in general are actually pro-Semitic. But the Chinese have identified something very, very simple. Attacking Jews and increasing anti-Semitism in the US weakens the United States. So strategically, this Chinese became anti-Semitic to weaken the US. We are just the victims. And the main tool they're doing, it's not the only one, the main tool is TikTok. If you put a pro-Israeli message in TikTok, it's being suppressed. If you put an anti-Israeli message, the algorithm multiplies it 40, 50 times. If you are a kid today, and that is the major social media platform for kids, this is what you see, anti-Semitic content. And anti-American content to the same level. Very similar thing happening with Russia. Russia also have a social media platform called Telegram. It's really owned by the FSB. And Russia is doing exactly the same. We're detecting new Russian anti-Semitic site every week. It's easy to detect that it's Russian. There's all kinds of telltale signs. They are going after us, not because of us, because they think it will weaken America. They're doing other things in America. A lot of the people that were guarding, let's say, the demonstration in LA, in the university, there were guards around. The guards were communist organization funded by Russia. There is another element of war, and that is a war in the West, and that's the war of the progressive. I don't think we understand the strength of it, because they've taken over a lot of the power centers of the United States, and I believe right now President Trump and others have awoken to it, but I'm not sure the war is that it's going to be easily won. Today, only 2% of faculty are conservatives. 98% are very, very radical leftists. 98%. If you're looking at district attorneys, if you're looking at security establishment, a large portion of the generals right now are woke. It will take years to reverse that. People say it's small percentage. They talk about Rashida Tlaib and Ilan Omar. No, the progressive caucus in Congress is more than 100 people today. We are looking at the next, if it's going to Democratic administration, a complete anti-Israeli, on the front administration. Sorry. So, interesting with progressive ideology, it has nothing to do, in theory, with the Palestinians. The progressive ideology is that if you're successful, you're oppressor. If you're a successful black person, you become white. You're not an oppressor. There's no way that you have succeeded without oppressing somebody. Since Palestinians are a failure, Israelis are a success, therefore, we are the oppressors. Therefore, we're part of the bad people. The Palestinians are basically riding that ideology. They've been doing it now for 15 years. They are not, the Palestinians are on an inherent place for these progressive. They're not. They actually, they're anti-gay, they're anti-everything that they believe in. But they've been riding it. And we can actually separate between them because they don't really care about the Palestinians, surprisingly. They care about control and control of America. They'll think that the cost of supporting the Palestinian will hurt the goal, they'll throw the Palestinian under the bus, and that should be part of our goal. So, who's funding it? There's a gentleman named Soros, the greatest anti-Semite of all, funding every organization there is, and we need to take care of him in some way and form. But there's also others. There's a whole network of organizations funding activities against Israel, and Israel cannot just stand on the line anymore. And the Jews cannot stand on the line. So what to do? First of all, is to recognize the problem. I don't think anybody recognizes it deep enough, especially not the state of Israel right now. This is now has to be a state goal. It's got to be a war. You've got to have resources that a state has. We're fighting states, countries. We need to put an army for that, okay? I want to see 2,000 cyber people in Israel dedicated just for that, okay? We don't have that. We have to start recognizing we're in a war for our existence, because if we lose the world support, nobody will give us arms, we'll have embargo, we will lose. And we have to organize the NGO activity. There's hundreds of millions of dollars, which Malcolm mentioned, fighting anti-Semitism, just not coordinated at all, each one doing their own. Everybody loves to do whatever they like to do. We have the resources to fight it effectively. We just have to also get organized inside the Jewish community. Thank you very much. I've got to stop here.
Powerful British accent and eloquent style aside, Melanie Phillips has been one of the sharpest and most fearless commentators the Jewish people have today. She regularly addresses the failures of Europe, yet remains hopeful that the Jewish people and Judeo-Christian values can and must prevail. I present to you now my friend and colleague, Melanie Phillips.
Hello, everybody. I've come to talk to you today about Israel's secret weapon. October the 7th threw down a challenge to the West. Would it choose civilization or barbarism? The West did not choose civilization. And the reason is that the West no longer understands what civilization is. What we've all been living through since October the 7th is not just a threat to Israel's survival. It's also an existential threat to the West and a war against civilization itself. Israel's experience over the last terrible year has told the West this in many different ways, but the West has not been listening. On the contrary, incredibly, the elites in the West have painted the most just war possible into aggression and war crimes by Israeli victims of war crimes, aggression and depravity. The way the West has accepted patently ludicrous falsehoods about this war as true has been unhinged. And we're not talking about demonstrators on the streets or on campus. Opinion polling reveals that nearly half of young Americans now support Hamas. In Britain, people are losing their childhood friends just because they've posted onto Facebook a picture of themselves on holiday in Israel. People are not prepared to give Israel's side even the time of day. The narrative is now that is now the default position in public debate among Britain's cultural elites is that Israel is a rogue state guilty of war crimes. Such double standards, demonization, and systematic lies are applied to no other people, nation, or cause on earth. It's a level of obsession and hysteria that suggests a pathology is at work. But it's across the West. It's as if both Hitler and Stalin have achieved posthumous victory through mass brainwashing in demonization of the Jewish people, enforced by an intelligentsia punishing anyone who dares challenge the lies. So what's caused the West to erupt like this? Well, to unpick it, I would suggest we should go back to October 7 and ask ourselves why that happened. Why were the Israeli defenses breached so catastrophically? Well, obviously, many reasons contributed to that, but I would suggest that one reason we need to consider is this, that the Israelis had told themselves a fantasy. The Israeli elites had told themselves that Hamas no longer wanted war because they wanted to shore up support from the Gazans. It's as if a murderous tyranny were Jeffersonian Democrats. How could the Israelis have been so blind? Because its military and security elites fell into a Western trap, believing that everyone in the world was like them, governed by reason and self-interest. This arrogant delusion may have been the result of half the IDF top brass having been taught at Harvard. Well, let's hope that Israel has now woken from this trance, but the West is still telling itself the same fantasy. It cannot see that the war against Israel is an Islamic holy war against first Israel and then the West. It cannot see the Islamic threat against itself in the West. It cannot see the steady advance of Islamization of Western nations through both the democratic process and threats and intimidation. It tells itself instead that Islamic extremism is nothing to do with Islam, that opposition to mass immigration is racist. Holding Muslims accountable for the misdeeds of a large minority in that community is Islamophobia. It cannot see that what's happening on the streets and the campuses is not just demonstrations against Israel, but jubilant and ecstatic demonstrations of control and power over the West on their way to conquer it for Islam. In London and in Brussels, in New York and in Toronto, Muslims are praying in large numbers in the streets. They have plenty of mosques. They're praying in the streets to show that they are taking control of that country, and they believe they are taking control. And what does the West say in response to this? It's freedom of expression. Europe is losing its identity through mass immigration, particularly of Muslims who refuse to integrate and who expect Western culture to adapt to Islam instead. Why can't the West see this? Because the West has told itself for decades that it's racist to think people from the developing world can do any wrong. The default position of the Western liberal is that the people from the developing world are oppressed by the West, and because they are victims, they can do no wrong, while the West, being their oppressors, can do nothing right. And Israel is considered one of the oppressors, because under this ideology, Jews can never be victims because they control everything: the finance, law, the media, industry. And so at its core, the default position of the Western liberal is deeply anti-Jew. Ignoring the threat to itself, the West is now blaming Israel instead for defending itself against that same threat. We've all gone through the looking glass. How can this have happened? Well, to understand this, we have to see this in the context of what the West has been doing to itself. For decades, it has subjected itself to an onslaught on its core institutions and values. Having said that the West was born in sin, it's had to destroy its core values and institutions. The Western nation state was held to be the source of division and war. It had to be superseded by transnational institutions and laws, the UN, the International Criminal Court, international law itself. There was no such thing as truth, only what is true for me. Well, if there's no such thing as truth, there's no such thing as lies, and so lies can be accepted. Everything is personal opinion, feelings trump facts. Who actually is the aggressor and who is the victim is irrelevant. The only victims are those who are not in the West's ruling class. In this reaction to October 7 in the West, we have seen the loss of conscience, justice, and rationality. We can only understand this if we understand that what the West has done to itself over the past half century is to collapse its own conscience, justice, and rationality. But conscience, justice, and rationality are, in fact, Jewish values. The unprecedented onslaught against the Jews has occurred because the Jews are central to Western civilization, a society against which the West itself has so self-destructively turned. October the 7th turbocharged the West's decades-long process of cultural suicide. What should the Jews do about it? Well, many things. First of all, the Jewish community should stop telling ourselves the same kind of lies that have consumed the West. Too many Jews nod along to this anti-Jewish thinking because they have never learned, I'm afraid to say, what Judaism is. We need to learn as a Jewish community to move from defense to offense, from the back foot to the front foot. We need to start proclaiming truths which many Jews find too uncomfortable and think extremist. Truths such as everything that Israel does is in accordance with international law, that the Jews are the indigenous people of the land, the whole land, that the Arabs are the colonialists, that there is no such thing as the Palestinians, that the Palestinian cause was invented only to steal the Jews' identity and history in the land from them, that the Jews alone have legal and historical right to the land, and that anyone who supports the Palestinian cause is supporting Nazi-style demonization of the Jews, ethnic cleansing, and genocide. And that applies to every Western liberal. And beyond this, Israel has a unique means to stop the West from going off the edge of the cultural cliff in the way that it is doing. Because the unique selling point of the Jewish people is cultural survival. That's what we do. Every culture that's tried to destroy us has vanished, while the Jewish people has survived. What's kept us going through the centuries? Staying true to what we are. We have remained attached to it because we recognize that the scaffolding of laws and precepts in that culture has produced the best way to live. It gives a meaning and purpose to life. It builds community. And we have recognized that for a people to have a future, they have to remain connected to their past. That is why the heroic soldiers of the IDF say in terms they feel the shades of the previous generations of Jews pushing them into battle. It's why even secular conscripts have worn tzitzit under their battle dress, ritual fringes under their battle dress, next to their hearts, because they understand they're not just defending their country, they are fulfilling the sacred duty of defending the Jewish people and ensuring that it continues to live. And this is why Israelis, unlike the rest of the West, are having on average 3 children, 3 babies per woman. They want to have children because they want to have an Israeli future. They want their children to continue the story of the Jewish people because they understand that the Jews are a great nation, that they stand for all the good things in the world, and that Israel is the fulfillment of that tremendous role. That's why they fight and die for this land, because they are fighting for a people they deeply care for. It is an act of love. So, in conclusion, what Israel is teaching the West, its secret weapon that it is trying to hand the West, what it's teaching the West is that if a culture is to survive, it has to love itself enough to take the measures that ensure it will continue. It has to love itself if it wants to survive. That's why Israel is going to win this terrible war, why it will not just survive, but will emerge stronger and greater. The same cannot be said of the West. The West is paralyzed before the Islamist death cult that threatens it, because the West is itself gripped by a cultural death wish. The Western culture that stands against the Jews is going down. The West will survive only if it decides to love itself and if it decides to love us, the Jewish people, instead of disdaining us and trying to erase what makes the Jewish people special and what's made the West special too. This is the Jewish moment. Israel understands this. Much of the Arab world has come to understand it too. Now it's time for the West and for diaspora Jews to understand it as well. Israel's secret weapon for saving the West is just 2 words that have saved the Jewish people throughout all these centuries. What are those 2 words? Choose life. Thank you very much.
One of the most powerful voices in the media fighting within Israel and for Israel has been Caroline Glick. A journalist and analyst and reporter for decades, until recently, Glick has served as JNS senior contributing editor and the host of the popular Caroline Glick show on JNS TV. Her views were so on target that Glick was recently appointed Prime Minister Netanyahu's International Affairs Advisor. Where she specializes particularly on an area she knows so well, U.S.-Israel relations. Please welcome my friend, my colleague, advisor to the Prime Minister, Caroline Glick.
Thanks, Alex. It's so strange to be visiting JNS, right? I mean, JNS is my home, so thank you very much for such a warm homecoming. Thank you all for coming. Isn't JNS amazing? It just shows that when you have the truth behind you, you grow. The truth is one of the best items you can try to sell. You know, if you're trying to sell something, selling the truth, like nothing beats it in terms of products. And we have an amazing truth to tell, we the Jewish people. You know, we meet now this week in Jewish calendar and Israeli calendar. We have 2 periods of 10 days that are the days of awe, the 10-day period between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And then the second period is now. It's between Yom HaShoah and Yom HaAtzmaut, and of course, before Yom HaAtzmaut, we have Yom HaZikaron. And I think that the confluence of these 10 days that we are in the midst of right now, is supposed to serve as a guidepost for us as a people here in the land of Israel, in the state of Israel, and because it tells us something very clear about where we were, who we are, and what we celebrate. And where were we? We were in a position where no matter how much will we had, we lacked the capacity to defend ourselves against people who hated us. The Jewish people are the eternal people, but just as we're the eternal people, anti-Semitism is the eternal hatred. And 80 years ago, we didn't have the capacity to do anything about the genocidal hatred of the Nazis and all of their collaborators in Europe, Africa, and beyond. So we were annihilated. A third of our people was annihilated. And we start this period of the Days of Awe remembering that, because as the Prime Minister said, and many times, I'm not sure if he said it in his masterpiece of a speech last night, but the point of Zionism wasn't to end anti-Semitism. We can't end anti-Semitism. It's not up to us. We're not the ones who suffer from anti-Semitism. We can't reason somebody out of something they weren't reasoned into, and it's not who we are. They try to define us, but we know who we are. And the point of Zionism is not to eradicate anti-Semitism. It's to eradicate the ability of anti-Semites to harm the Jewish people. I'll just repeat it. The purpose of Zionism is to prevent the anti-Semites from carrying out the genocide of Jewry that they aspire to commit. We learn it every year. We say it at the Pesach Seder. In every generation, they rise up to destroy us, but God saves us. God and ourselves, our power. And the purpose of Zionism is to prevent the eradication of the Jewish people at the hands of anti-Semites. And on Yom HaZikaron, L'Chalalei Marachot Yisrael, we celebrate, we revere, we embrace the memory of those who gave their lives defending us against anti-Semites, defending us against people who wanted to eradicate us, who seek our eradication. And of course, on Yom Ha'atzmaut, we celebrate our freedom, knowing full well that the implications of that freedom is that we managed to survive the onslaught of anti-Semitism in our time, thanks to the sacrifices of our fighters who fought to protect us, who fight still today to protect us. Right now, we're in the midst of these 10 days of awe during a great war for our survival, a war that the government named the War of Redemption. And what is it that we're trying to redeem in this war? What is it that we're trying to accomplish in this war? Well, obviously, we want to redeem our hostages. And as the Prime Minister said last night, so far, we have brought home 196 out of 251 hostages. 147 of them came home alive. And we're seeking to redeem the remaining 59 hostages. About up to 24 of them are alive, and bring them home. We also want to redeem ourselves of our past. We want to redeem ourselves from 30 years of basically basing national policy on forgetting the lessons of these 10 days of awe, of not paying attention to them and not placing them at the centerpiece of our policy making, not recognizing that anti-Semitism is at its base annihilationist, that anti-Semites don't just seek to subjugate the Jews, they seek to eradicate Judaism, which is why since the Romans to the Palestinians, they seek to erase our history. So that we forgot that. We based policy since Oslo on this idea that the Palestinian hatred of Israel is not implacable, that it's possible to appease them, that it's possible to give them land, give them legitimacy, give them arms, give them money, Judea and Samaria, give them control over the population centers there, give them Gaza, start discussing Jerusalem, all this in the framework of the Oslo Accord, which recognized the PLO, a terrorist organization whose sole purpose in existing is to eradicate Israel and Jewish history, to accept them as the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. I was in the talks when I was in the army, and it was extraordinary the lengths that the leaders of Israel went through in order to ignore every single thing that the Palestinians were saying among themselves. Because what they were telling us all along was that they are implacable. And there were so many tells, obviously, the funding of terrorism, the conduct of terror, the incitement of terror, but there were two main tells that were the most important. The first tell was that they never recognized the legitimacy of the State of Israel, ever, under any circumstance. At any time, they recognized the existence of the State of Israel, but not the right of the State of Israel, the Jewish state, to exist. And the second thing that they did was they taught their children to aspire to conduct a genocide of Jewry. And this was true in the Palestinian Authority, this was true in the Palestinian Authority run by Hamas, run by Fatah. They all were saying the same things, and they were all teaching their children the same things, the same textbooks, the same hatred, not only in schools, but in mosques, in hospitals, and everywhere. And we kept telling ourselves, yes, but everything will change after the final status. Literally, these were statements that were made by generals in the Israeli army back in the 1990s when I was in. And we heard echoes of that in the statements that were made by security chiefs before October 7th, that Hamas was deterred, that they just wanted a better life for their people. They had the plan to invade Israel. They thought it was nothing because Hamas is deterred. They said it. And so we had this idea for 30 years that an implacable foe who organizes itself around hatred of Jews and a desire to wipe us off the map could be appeased. We have to redeem that past. We have to redeem ourselves of those mistakes. And we are. We are. We are eradicating Hamas in Gaza. We are destroying their ability to wage war against us. We are not permitting the continued fable that the Palestinian Authority is a peace partner to become some sort of centerpiece of a post-war Gaza. It's not going to happen. And we're done with talking about a two-state solution. We're done. You can't have a two-state solution when one of the sides doesn't respect the state that already exists, doesn't accept the fundamental legitimacy of the Jewish state. Nothing has changed from the time of the Mufti. As the Prime Minister said last night, not a thing has changed, except that the educational system has become even more anti-Semitic. And we know this. Why? How do we know that this two-state solution is dead? Well, because we had a control group, right? You know, the Prime Minister back in 2005, he did everything from his position as finance minister to oppose Sharon's plan, his harebrained plan, to leave Gaza, lock, stock, and barrel. Oh, they won't make a deal with us, so we'll just pick up our marbles and leave. We'll exhume our graves. We'll destroy every single community in the Gaza Strip, and then they're going to see, wow, that was fantastic of the Jews to do that. We don't hate them anymore. We're going to take all of this aid money that the international community is giving us and the greenhouses, etc., and we're going to turn Gaza into Singapore. And what did they, lo and behold, do? What the millions of people who warned against us said they would do. They turned Gaza into Afghanistan. Right? That's what they did. And they turned it into hell from 400 subterranean miles of tunnels whose sole purpose was the commission of genocide. Right? That's all they did. They had a state. We gave them a state. The first sovereign Palestinian state existed for 18 years, from 2005 until 2023. It was there. And everything that they got, they used to build a machine of annihilation of Israel. And then we got October 7th, and we saw what happens when they get to use it. This is the end state of a Palestinian state, genocide. You can clap, I guess. So we have to redeem that past, and we redeemed that past by saying we're going to win this war. As the Prime Minister said, we're going to annihilate Hamas. They won't be here. Get our men back. And we're going to implement the Trump plan to give the people of Gaza a chance to make their future somewhere else if that's what they want to do. First good plan I've heard in decades. And we're not going to let another Palestinian state be built in Gaza, not in Judea and Samaria, not in Jerusalem. That's over. It's done. But we have to think about something else that we lost over 30 years of ignoring the lessons of the Holocaust. The other thing that we lost was our ability to tell the world our story, the truth. Because if you're saying that you're for a two-state solution, or even just not saying this is garbage, it's not going to happen, this is building a genocide machine, then how can you defend yourself? Because if the problem in the Middle East, as President Clinton once said, if 99% of the problems of the Middle East would be solved if the Palestinians got a state, then who's responsible for the absence of peace in the Middle East? We are. Right? We are, because we're not coughing up Judea and Samaria, we're not coughing up Jerusalem, and it's all our fault. We're the ones blocking the peace train, aren't we? If everybody who's anybody knows that the only way to solve the problems of the Middle East is to establish a Palestinian state, and we're the ones blocking that Palestinian state from being established because we keep having all of these, we're sticking points, security, Israel's security interests, then we're in the wrong. How do we defend ourselves? How do we defend ourselves? How do we tell our story? When we keep saying, yes, of course we want peace, we want a Palestinian state, we're willing to do this, but only if A, B, and C apply. So here's the thing. We weren't telling our story, which is the truth. We weren't saying that there is literally not a nation on earth that has a stronger right to its homeland than the Jewish people. Not one. Not one. The whole concept of a nation state was built here. It was built here. We gave that idea to the nations of the world because we were the first sovereign nation state. In fact, we were the first people who defined ourselves as a nation. We did it at Mount Sinai. And we didn't tell this story, not in a really comprehensive way, not without apologies and clearing of the throats, because we were stuck. And it wasn't because we all wanted to. Ask my boss. It's because when everybody who is anybody says that this is all you can have, this is the best you can hope for, this is what you're supposed to aspire to, then how are you supposed to be able to tell your story and say, no, that's not who we are and that's not what we aspire to? You can't. You're stuck. You're stuck in a policy position that keeps you constantly on the defensive. And we're done with that too. We're done. Part of redeeming ourselves in this war is saying we're done making excuses for people who want to kill our children. We're done. We want to redeem ourselves. We want to justify the sacrifice of the people whose graves we will visit this week. They didn't die so that we could go around saying, yes, but on the one hand and on the other hand. No, they died so that this country would go forward and win. Now, what happened while we were clearing our throats for 30 years? So the majority of Israelis know that this is garbage. You know, you talk to anybody on the street and the old metaphorical taxi ride and everything like that. Israelis get it. We know who we are. Like my father-in-law, he didn't come from Morocco because he was reading, Herzl's Jewish State. He was going to Israel because he said the Amidah 3 times a day. And the Amidah says, "V'techazena einenu b'shuvcha leTzion b'rachamim," and we will live to see the return of your mercy to Zion. Zionism is Judaism. A Jewish state is established. Obviously, it's time to come home. Duh. So we are done, and we are out here, and we are telling everybody this is our land legally, our land historically. It's ours, all of it. I don't want to talk to you about Iran. Lots of people talk to you about Iran. I'll just say one thing. The mullahs hate Jews, but they're also smart. They know that if they put Israel #1 on their target list, and people east, west, north, south who don't particularly like Jews say, oh, well, have at it, or let the Jews deal with it. I remember this one extraordinary statement that Hillary Clinton made in the Democratic primary in 2008. I had to talk about it in an NPR interview or something. And everybody, the Jews in Philadelphia where she was speaking, were all pumped up by it. She said, if Iran nukes Israel, we'll nuke Iran. And everybody started cheering, and I'm listening to this, and I said, did you miss something? What? Did you hear the first part of her sentence? And that's the concept. When we're #1 on the target list, we'll take care of it. Well, we're #1 on the target list, and as the Prime Minister said, we're not going to let that happen. But I think it's important to note that it's not just the anti-Semitism here. It's also we have to pay attention to the fact that it always starts with the Jews. A lot of people were willing to countenance Hitler and his desire to take over the world because he was talking about the Jews. A lot of people didn't like us. So they heard him saying that the Jews would not exist anymore in Europe, and they thought, that's good. And they didn't realize what the implications were of the Jews being #1 on the target list were for them until they found out. So we're #1 on Iran's target list, fine. But the distance between #1 and #2 is not years, it's minutes. When you have ballistic missiles, it's not, you don't measure time between #1 and #2 in months or years, you measure it in seconds. And it's very important that that be clear as well. The Jews, I don't know whether you'd say we woke up on October 7th. Some of us woke up. Some of us have been awake the entire time. Regardless, I think that we are redeeming ourselves because as we look towards Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut, and as we marked Yom HaShoah last week, think that the overwhelming majority, say almost the absolute majority of Israelis, understand fully in the midst of this war of redemption where we were in the Holocaust, where we were on October 7th, who we are, and what we celebrate. And we're not going to lose that understanding anytime soon. And we're going to remove all the obstacles that stand in our way to securing our future as Jews, as a people of Israel, as Israelis, for ourselves and for Jews all over the world, under the leadership of the man I am so privileged to call my boss, Prime Minister Netanyahu. And by the grace of God and the most heroic soldiers on the face of the planet, and as my boss says, together we will fight, and together, with God's help, we'll win. Am Yisrael Chai, Chag Sameach.
Okay, that concludes our morning plenary. We're going to take a very short networking break as they put the room back together. It should take between 15 to 20 minutes to do that. And then we're going to go into the seminars, and we invite you all to be part of those as well. Thank you so much.